Chapter 3003. Fortunately, Lieutenant Colonel Sherlock had learned his lesson and avoided the awkwardness that followed. Confident in his heart, he waited for the first 2 rounds of daggers to be thrown. Lieutenant Colonel Sherlock's slight smile was a little unbearable. 2 rounds of teams for SFS border guards. Not a single dagger hit the target. When the 3rd team went on stage and 2 daggers hit the target, the referee and military officials applauded and praised them. Only then did Lieutenant Colonel Sherlock's smile become a little more normal, but he also understood that the difficulty this time was really high. Then, the 4 daggers of the referee took him to see just now all hit the target. Which country, which contestant hit the target? Italy's headgear commando team? America's amphibious commando team? Estonia's commando team? The special boat team from Great Britain Island? When Lieutenant Colonel Sherlock jogged to the starting point of 50 meters with a dagger in his hand, his brain couldn't help but think. As he thought about it, he thought about the Chinese contestants. The Chinese soldiers that they looked down on had always been in front of their SFS border guards. No matter how he led his team to sprint, there was no way they could surpass them. They always thought that in the next round, they would definitely be able to surpass the Chinese soldiers who didn't have any real skills. But reality always told them. This time, the Chinese soldiers were ahead of them again. Time and time again, they thought that they would definitely be able to surpass them. But in the end, they heard from the referee and military officials at the control station that the Chinese soldiers had already left. Could be a Chinese contestant? A guess flashed through his mind. Lieutenant Colonel Sherlock suddenly shook his head. No, that's impossible. I shouldn't think too much. I shouldn't think that the Chinese soldiers are very strong. He spoke in a low voice, trying to convince himself. The SFS border guards were far stronger than the Chinese soldiers. This was something that everyone knew. He shouldn't think that the Chinese soldiers had the strength to beat the SFS border guards. Thinking like this was an insult to every soldier of the SFS border guards. So what if the Chinese soldiers surpassed them in time? The difference in time did count for points, but the real victory was in the number of points they actually scored. It didn't matter if they were a little late, as long as they actually scored more points than the Chinese soldiers. With this thought in mind, Lieutenant Colonel Sherlock calmed down a lot. Soon, he completed the throwing knife and successfully scored a point on his own. He won even louder applause from the referees and military officials, who congratulated Lieutenant Colonel Sherlock for his good result. Compared to the result of missing the target, Lieutenant Colonel Sherlock's 2 daggers hitting the target was indeed not bad. The SFS members also applauded for Lieutenant Colonel Sherlock. They looked at their team leader with pride. Their team leader was a sharpshooter. Even though he didn't get 2 points, it was already very impressive. But their happiness didn't last long. Lieutenant Colonel Sherlock asked which country's contestant had scored 2 points. After receiving the referee's answer, the smile on Lieutenant Colonel Sherlock's face froze on the spot, and his face turned green. The female soldier from the Chinese side is quite amazing. She is the only participant who has scored 2 points. She is better than any of the male soldiers. That was the referee's reply to Lieutenant Colonel Sherlock. It was as if an invisible and sharp dagger had stabbed into Lieutenant Colonel Sherlock's chest, so much so that Lieutenant Colonel Sherlock's vision turned dark. She was a female soldier from the Chinese side. So far, she was the only participant who had scored 2 individual points. Why was a Chinese soldier? How could this be the Chinese soldier he looked down on? If this continued, he really couldn't help but suspect that they were actually inferior to the Chinese soldiers. Chapter 3004. It was a recognized fact that the SFS Border Defense Army was not as good as the Chinese Special Forces. Their scores in the subject competition were lower than the Chinese soldiers, and their time was also lower than the Chinese soldiers. Even their character was not as good as the Chinese soldiers. This was a recognized fact that did not need to be deliberately publicized. The generals of the observation group and the soldiers of various countries all knew it in their hearts, but they did not say it out loud. Lieutenant Colonel Sherlock did not dare to think that they were not as good as the Chinese soldiers. But since the thought flashed through his mind, it left a trace and could no longer be erased. The more he wanted to ignore it, the more he would care about it. The more he wanted to deliberately ignore it, the more often he would think about it. The Chinese female soldier is really amazing. Every time she makes a move, everyone is amazed. Fortunately, she is not as good as the male soldiers in other aspects. Otherwise, this would be a very terrifying female soldier. Before the SFS Border Defense Army left the knife-throwing arena, the referee was still sighing. Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk, who had left, felt as if a huge rock was pressing down on his chest, making it difficult for him to even breathe. Fortunately, she was not as good as the male soldiers in other aspects. Otherwise, he really did not dare to think about it anymore. Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk was also very glad that the Chinese female soldier was only good at sniping and was not very good in other aspects. He was thinking about something and did not pay attention to his team members for a while. When they learned that the Chinese female soldier had scored 2 individual points, their expressions were like frosted leaves, listless, and their morale instantly plummeted. How could this be? The Chinese soldiers were clearly very weak, but why did they perform so well in the IKA assault competition? They could not understand why the Chinese soldiers, who had always been very weak, would always surpass their powerful SFS Border Defense Army. Was this reasonable? It was not reasonable at all. Since it was not reasonable at all, then why did the Chinese soldiers keep surpassing them? Why? The lieutenant colonel, senior colonel, and their generals all told them that the Chinese were not terrible, and the Chinese soldiers were even less terrible. There was no way their country could be compared to their own country, and their soldiers could not be compared to their own country soldiers. Their country was the #1 in Asia, and the Chinese were nothing. This was what they often heard in the news and newspapers. They often saw how backward and poor the Chinese were, and how outdated their soldiers' equipment was. They used weapons and equipment that had been eliminated decades ago. It was simply a dream to want to suppress the powerful #1 in Asia with such weapons and equipment. He had always thought that this was what they thought. Even their parents and relatives thought the same. However, after several days of competition, from the initial arrogance in front of the Chinese soldiers to the current doubts, they had always thought that the Chinese soldiers were a little shaky. They could no longer think that the Chinese soldiers were very weak and easy to bully. They really could not think so. Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk. Not only did the sergeant have doubts, but the other 6 soldiers also had doubts. They looked at Shaluk with sparkling eyes, waiting for the lieutenant colonel's answer. And Chapter 3005. Being questioned, Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk's heart trembled a little, but he was an officer, a commander, and also a decision-maker. In the face of doubts from the officers, he had to answer them firmly. Of course, we're the SFS Border Defense Army, a powerful special force. We can't lose to the soldiers of a country we've always looked down on. Officer, please remember what our goal is. Remember why we're here and what we're fighting for. I don't want to hear any more doubts from you without confidence. Losing confidence is scary, and losing confidence means losing faith. I won't allow such a thing to happen in my team. Do you understand? Please answer me loudly. Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk said loudly and solemnly. His eyes were filled with indisputable coldness. It was because of his cold expression and confident attitude that the morale of the nervous soldiers was boosted at once. Yes, they were the SFS Border Defense Army, a powerful special force. They had excellent combat equipment, and they had been learning from the Western Special Forces. They also had the support of a powerful country. They shouldn't doubt. They should believe that they were stronger than the Chinese soldiers, and the Chinese soldiers could never surpass the SFS Border Defense Army. They answered Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk loudly and confidently. Their voices were also very hoarse. In order to show their strength, they roared until the veins on their necks bulged fiercely. We have no problem. We can definitely overcome all difficulties. We are the strongest SFS Border Defense Army. They roared until their saliva splattered everywhere. Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk nodded, showing that he was very satisfied. The soldiers' confident answers also calmed him down a lot. Yes, they had no problem. They could definitely overcome all difficulties. They were the strongest SFS Border Defense Army. The Chinese female soldiers were only good at sniping, but they weren't outstanding in other aspects. The Chinese male soldiers hadn't achieved any amazing results so far, so there was no need to doubt that they were weaker than the Chinese soldiers. The competition will end at 6 o'clock. It's now 2:11. We still have time to surpass the Chinese soldiers. Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk raised his wrist to look at the time. His eyes were fierce as he said in a deep voice, "We still have nearly 4 hours to enter the last competition. Here, we can directly fight the Chinese contestants and teach them a lesson. We've endured for a long time. Today is the duel between us and the Chinese soldiers. Beat them. Beat them. We have to beat them." The SFS border guards raised their arms and roared with high fighting spirit. Victory was right in front of them, just waiting for their arrival. At 2:03 in the afternoon, after several hours of careful marching, the Chinese team finally arrived at the last control station to receive the mission and receive the rules of the last major subject. After receiving the rules of the competition, Xia Jinyuan looked through them and silently handed them to Li Jinyan. At the same time, he let out a long sigh. He didn't say anything. Just this one move instantly caused the hearts of all the team members to jump. F***CK, you can't do this. I feel like I'm going to have a heart attack. The T6 combatant patted his chest and panted heavily. I don't feel very well right now. Did something go wrong with the competition rules again? Well, it's a big demon moth. I'm going to have a heart attack too. Colonel Xia wiped his face, smoothing out the paint even more evenly. Difficult as ascending to the heavens. Chapter 3006. Are you trying to shake the morale of the troops? After reading the rules, Li Jinyan raised his leg and kicked Lieutenant Colonel Xia, who was starting to make trouble again. It's a miracle that you've survived until now. Why would he tease his comrades from time to time? Was there something wrong with his captain's head? G3 patted T6's shoulder with heartache and said earnestly, "Look at how calm young Sparrowhawk and I are. Our little hearts didn't even skip a beat. After being with Captain Xia for so long, can't you tell if he's doing it on purpose? Let me tell you a way to identify the problem. The more he says there's a problem, the more difficult it seems to be. You shouldn't believe him. If you do, you'll be a fool. You might as well be called SZ from now on." T6 blinked. "I understand now, but can you explain what SZ means?" SZ, is it the abbreviation for an idiot? Yi Qian asked with some uncertainty. "You're indeed a smart person. You guessed it right." G3 gave Yi Qian a thumbs up. In exchange, T6 kicked him in the butt. "Idiot? How am I an idiot? How am I an idiot?" T6 complained bitterly. "Captain, I'm an innocent soldier. Why did you have to deceive my feelings? How could you bear to deceive someone as innocent as me?" "Because you're SZ." None of them believed it, but you did, Xia Jinyan replied calmly. The mockery in his eyes did not diminish. "From now on, you'll be SZ. It suits your temperament very well." "Damn, where are our female soldiers? Come out and take him down a notch. He's such a bully." T6 looked for Yi Qian and tried to get Yi Qian to avenge him. There was no other way. A shameless Q king who would deceive an innocent man like him would not deceive the feelings of their female soldiers. Yi Qian left the battlefield and stood beside Li Jinyan. He smiled as he looked at his comrades, who could still joke around. No matter how hard or tiring it was, happiness and happiness were essential. Her man had become the youngest captain of the Snowfield Brigade. Other than his strength, his charisma had also increased. After looking through the rules of the competition, it was time for the battle deployment. As usual, the discussion time for the battle deployment was limited to 15 minutes. After the joke was over, the atmosphere relaxed. Xia Jinyuan put away his playful smile and looked at his comrades sternly. He said in a deep voice, "The top 4 teams have already entered the castle. According to the rules, this is a one-on-one competition. Previously, we learned that the top 4 contestants who entered the castle would become the defending team. But now, it seems that the rules have changed a lot. Since it's a one-on-one competition, then the top 4 contestants should have competed against each other to determine the first, second, and third place. The 4th place should stay and fight against us. But IKA Assault has always been flexible and changeable. Since there is no detailed explanation in the rules, there are still certain variables in the middle. We will only know what kind of one-on-one competition it is when we arrive. According to the rules of the competition, the top 4 teams who enter the castle will become the defending team. The contestants who come later will be selected by one of the top 4 teams and become the attacking team. Because of his hoarse voice, Xia Jinyuan spoke in a low voice. His gravelly voice had a different kind of authority. The attacking team must defeat the defending team in order to successfully take over the castle. But if the attacking team is fighting and the contestants from the countries behind come over, they can also launch a sneak attack on the attacking team. Once they succeed, the attacking team will be able to move up another spot in the ranking. Chapter 3007. At this point, Xia Jinyuan lowered his head and looked at the paper document again. He frowned slightly before continuing. The problem now is that if any of the contestants from the other countries catch up to us, they might attack us in order to get more points. So, just in case if such a situation really happens, we'll probably have to sacrifice a few of our people in this battle and bite the contestants from the other countries who try to overtake us to death. As soon as he finished speaking, the team members' faces darkened. Sacrificing a few of their people was the last thing they wanted to see. Their faces darkened, and so did their hearts. But soon, they all discovered another problem. Something's not right. There's a problem. Wait, I have to go smoothly first. Almost at the same time, Big Shark, Big Eel, and T6 spoke at the same time. Meanwhile, G3 and Young Sparrow Hawk's brows relaxed. Instead, Yi Qian, who was playing with a stalk of dry grass, said directly, "Once you become the ambusher, you can't change your mind midway. You either win or lose the battle. If you become the ambusher's representative, you'll have to face the special forces of 2 countries. According to the rules of the competition, the ambusher needs to defeat all the special forces of both countries in order to advance by 1 place. Once you're defeated, your points will be 0. With such a huge risk, will we choose the ambusher's side? That's right. That's where the problem lies. If it were me, I definitely wouldn't choose to be the ambusher's side. The chances of winning a 1-on-2 battle are too slim." T6 nodded heavily. The wrong he was referring to was this. Xia Jinyuan made a fist with one hand and coughed lightly. Then he looked at the serious faces of his comrades and raised his eyebrows. There was a hint of wickedness in his deep eyes. That's right, the risk is too great. If there's really a team that dares to do this, they'll have to be very strong and physically strong. But who can be sure that things on the battlefield will go according to our train of thought? No, we just want to make sure that we don't become the ambusher's side, but that doesn't mean that others won't. Especially the SFS border guards. They haven't overtaken us so far, so I'm sure they're holding back a mouthful of blood. Now that they have a chance to overtake us, even if the risk is too great, they might be willing to give it a try. If it were me, I would also give it a try. Either I win or I lose. Since there are only 2 outcomes, I might as well give it a try. Who knows, I might still have a chance. Don't forget why the SFS border countries are targeting us. They only want to defeat us and make fun of us in front of other countries. Now that the opportunity has come, Lieutenant Colonel Sharuk will not give up so easily. His words made Yi Qian and the others fall silent. If it were any other participating country behind the Chinese side, they might not have taken such a risk, but if it was the SFS Border Defense Force, then that was not necessarily the case. With so much pent-up frustration, it was indeed possible for them to choose to launch a sneak attack. If it were me, I would choose to be the one to launch a sneak attack. Li Jinyan, who rarely spoke up. He was the captain and a commander. If there was a chance to defeat the opponent, he would not let it go. SFS Lieutenant Colonel Sharuk of the Border Defense Force was also a commander. He would definitely seize the opportunity to humiliate the Chinese side. This was also why Xia Jinyuan had said that whether it was the defending side or the attacking side, they would definitely go up against the SFS Border Defense Force. It was because the SFS Border Defense Force had always been right behind them. As long as there was even the slightest chance, the competitive Lieutenant Colonel Sharuk would definitely seize it. Chapter 3008. If that's the case, we'll drag them to death. the T6 combatant said through gritted teeth. You want to humiliate the Chinese side? To hell with that. I won't let you get away with it. After that, it was time to arrange who would drag out the SFS border defense troops. Time was short, so they needed to make arrangements quickly. The rules of the competition even state that the rules may change at any time. It looks like there will be times when we'll be helpless. I have an ominous feeling about this. Your jinx is making me feel uneasy. I'm not sure. Flexibility is a characteristic of the IKA assault competition, so it's normal for there to be rules that will make us helpless. After the deployment, the Chinese Special Forces soldiers communicated as they walked. Two people in front observed the progress while the two behind stayed on guard. They maintained a balanced speed as they headed towards the final competition point. At 2:46 p.m., Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk arrived at the final control point with his team members. Soon, Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk made a decision. Just as Xia Jinyuan and Li Jinyan had guessed, he knew that the Chinese Special Forces were still ahead of them. After reading the rules of the competition, the competitive Shaluk only considered it for a minute before making a decision. He chose to be the sneak attacker. Even if the risk was great, the time taken would be prolonged. Even if he was defeated in the end and got a score of 0 in this round, he would still choose to be the sneak attacker. This was a chance to turn defeat into victory. Even if he had to defeat the special forces of two countries to surpass the Chinese side, he would still choose to be the sneak attacker. At this moment, the Chinese side was already close to the ancient castle. Through the tall and dense trees, they could see a dilapidated ancient building made of stone through the gaps between the layers of leaves. 100 years ago, this was the prison of Stone City where prisoners were held. During the war, this place was attacked by artillery and the entire castle was severely damaged. After so many years of wind and rain, the roof of the castle had collapsed and the walls were severely damaged. It looked like it would collapse at any moment. Yi Qian, who was crawling on high ground, used binoculars to observe the castle that was still standing in the depths of the primeval forest after 100 years of wind and rain. This was the final competition venue of the Chinese side's IKA assault, and also the place where the special forces of various countries would fight. She had to observe it carefully. This was a castle made of rocks. Because it was a prison for prisoners, the layout of the castle was not complicated, but it was very tall. It was at least 6 stories high. The walls were grayish-green, as if covered by a thin layer of moss. Unknown weeds and vines were still growing around the walls, making the whole castle look desolate and gloomy. In the gloomy and imposing ancient castle, the final battle awaited the Chinese soldiers. The judging panel received the latest positioning of the Chinese soldiers and informed them of the final rules at the same time. Xia Jinyuan listened quietly, his handsome face so calm that no one could see anything strange. After the referee finished speaking, he confirmed whether or not the referee had understood. He then replied faintly, "Understood. Uncertainty? How flexible." This was the real IKA assault competition. Now that he had received the latest rules, he wasn't surprised, and there was no need to be surprised. The team members on alert did not notice Xia Jinyuan's expression. They only paid attention to the situation around them. At the same time, they observed Xia Jinyuan's movements. Yi Qian's team, on the other hand, noticed Xia Jinyuan's expression. Seeing his cold expression, he knew that the referees must have come up with new rules for the competition. He slowly retreated from the high ground and waited for Xia Jinyuan to speak. Chapter 3009. Xia Jinyuan, who had retreated from the high ground, turned around and looked up at the sky. He said to his comrades, "Let's split into gates A and B, 2 entrances and 2 exits." The British and American teams had already left Gate A, and the competition had ended. Italy and Estonia are still competing one-on-one. Let's enter Gate A and wait for the next team. In the castle, the top 4 teams that had arrived early had already competed. The first and second teams had already been decided and were heading to the end of the competition. The top 3 and top 4 teams were still competing. In other words, Xia Jinyuan's previous guess was correct. The Chinese team had become the defending team. In other words, the Chinese team had to wait for the next team to arrive and eliminate the other team. Then, the Chinese team could leave. If the other team eliminated the Chinese team, then the Chinese team would have 0 points in this round. The first team would compete with the top 2 teams, the top 3 teams would compete with the top 4 teams, and the 5th team would have to wait for the next team to arrive. Then if there were no accidents, it would be the SFS Border Defense Force. Should we give it a try? The calm Great Mermaid was a little restless. According to the rules of the competition, the team that arrived late could be the surprise attacker. If they won, they would be able to move up 1 place in the ranking. The Chinese team was currently 5th. If they won, they would move up 1 place and be 4th. No, that's good. Xia Jinyuan was unmoved and immediately rejected the idea. We're taking the middle road. There were a few times when we could have overtaken the Estonian team, but we gave up. If we attack now, we'll be too big of a target and attract too much attention. It's not in line with our initial plan. They were here to learn. Take the middle road, don't compete, don't be in the limelight, and keep a low profile to learn. Don't be too weak, and don't be too strong. This way, they could protect the dignity of their country and win glory for their country. This was the hope that the country and the military had for the Chinese soldiers who came to participate in the competition. It was not advisable to suddenly compete with other countries. The Great Mermaid smacked her forehead and laughed. I'm overthinking. Thinking that victory was right in front of her, she instantly forgot why she was here. It's a pity that we didn't get to fight the Americans or Italians in this round. Otherwise, we'd be able to observe their close-range combat from a closer distance, the Big Mermaid said regretfully. In the competition that lasted for 5 days and 4 days, half of the more than 20 courses had been fought with the United States and Italy before. In the technical courses, such as crossing rope bridges, rowing boats, planting mines, obtaining intelligence, identifying weapons and equipment, shooting in vehicles, and long-distance shooting at night, the Chinese side had fought with the special forces of Italy and the United States. They had seen how powerful the special forces of these 2 countries were. Now that they had entered the battle between the 2 sides, it was indeed a pity that they did not have to fight against the elite special forces of the 2 countries. Although we can't fight against them, it's not bad to be able to fight against the SFS Border Defense Force. After being here for so long, we've only competed with the SFS Border Defense Force 4 times. Now that we can fight in close-range combat, let's have a good fight and see who's stronger and who's weaker. Xia Jinyuan did not feel that it was a pity. His steady voice rang out slowly. We've already fought against the top special forces of the United States and Italy too many times. We have a certain level of understanding of their strength. They must have a certain level of understanding of our strength as well. This is enough, nothing more. The Snowfield Brigade could not be exposed. If other countries found out about it, the observation team would inevitably become suspicious. Chapter 30:10. The reason why Yi Qian was able to stand at the peak of the storm was because she was still a military academy student and had not joined the army. After the observation team's generals returned to China, if they wanted to investigate Yi Qian, they could only find out that she was a military academy student representing her country in the competition. Other than that, there was nothing else they could find out. Meanwhile, the performance of the male soldiers was not outstanding. The Chinese military's strength could be seen from the 1999 Grand Celebration. Since they could develop so many weapons on their own, it was not surprising that they could also nurture a batch of outstanding soldiers. China was a big country, and it was a big country that had been invaded before. History was in front of them. If they were not strong enough, they might face another invasion. How could a big country that had already woken up allow other countries to target their homeland again? Being strong was something a large country had to do. And a strong country could not do without a strong military. And a strong military could not do without the dedication of every soldier. Did the SFS Border Defense Forces say China was weak? No, China was not weak. They were strong, but their strength was still improving. And in this competition, the performance of the Chinese soldiers was to let the other countries see China's progress and the strength of the Chinese soldiers. It was to let the other countries understand that China was not weak and that sometimes there they would only back down because China advocated peace. Xia Jinyuan believed that the generals of the other countries already had an idea of how strong the Chinese soldiers were. Therefore, there was no need for them to compete for a place in the competition. They only needed to maintain their ranking and suppress the SFS border defense forces who looked down on the Chinese soldiers. That would be enough. We don't have to think about fighting against the American and Italian special forces anymore. Let's think about how we're going to fight against the SFS border defense forces later. We have to let them know that some things are not to be said lightly, the T6 combatant said excitedly. He was more interested in fighting against the SFS border defense forces. The rest of the team members did not have any objections. They became the defending side and engaged in a life-and-death battle with the SFS border defense forces. Without much time to waste, Xia Jinyuan and Li Jinyan quickly completed their combat deployment and headed for the castle at 3 p.m. sharp. The Chinese team members entered from another entrance. In the roofless castle, they could clearly hear the sounds of fighting coming from inside. It was already a close combat battle, which meant the competition was coming to an end. Yi Qian had already stepped on Sparrowhawk's knee. With a leap, he stood on top of the collapsed stone wall of the castle, which was still covered with shrubs. She climbed to the top and observed the situation at the entrance. If she discovered anything, she could immediately fire. The faint sounds of fighting coming from the side did not attract Yi Qian's attention at all. The members of the Italian assault team, who fought against the Estonian special forces, felt a little regretful. Previously, they thought that they would be able to compete with the Chinese team on the battlefield once again as the defending team. Who knew that the rules would change again after they arrived, making it impossible for them to fight against the Chinese special forces. It was really a pity. They had been looking forward to fighting with the Chinese special forces, but it turned out that it was not the case. At 3:42 p.m., Yi Qian, who was observing from the hidden station, noticed something up ahead. Through her sniper scope, she saw a camouflaged figure flitting past in front of her. "Attention! The target has appeared ahead," she reminded her comrades in a low voice. "Roger that. Stay alert," Xia Jinyuan answered her. All the team members entered combat mode and were ready to fire at any time. Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk led his team members closer to the castle. They already knew who their opponents were. It was the Chinese soldiers they were determined to deal with. Chapter 30:11. Unfortunately, the Chinese soldiers didn't become the ambushers. Otherwise, they could have become the ambushers and dealt a heavy blow to the Chinese soldiers from behind. Although they couldn't ambush them from behind and overtake them, they could still fight them head-on. As long as they won, they could still score points, but the points wouldn't be as high as if they won against the ambushers. Yi Qian had already seen 3 disguised foreign special forces soldiers enter her sniping range. She told Xia Jinyuan their positions. The 3 of them are approaching. Looks like they want to engage in an invading battle. It just so happens that we want to play the game of catching turtles in a jar. Don't be hasty. You keep an eye on the left and young Sparrowhawk on the right. Put them all within your effective shooting range first. Don't kill them one by one like you're plucking carrots. Keep them in the jar, the chief commander of the battle, Lieutenant Colonel Xia, said with a smile. The coldness in his eyes was like the coldness of a bow. The Chinese soldiers were lazy? Weak? Huh. He remembered all of that. Now that he had the chance to teach them a lesson, how could he let it go? Let's see who's the weak one. Faced with the SFS border guards who insulted the Chinese soldiers, Lieutenant Colonel Xia wasn't magnanimous enough to let them go. How could the dignity and glory of the country be trampled on by other countries? They want to use firepower to wipe us out in one fell swoop. The assaulter in the front is leading the charge, followed by the explosives man with hand grenades at his waist. The sniper hasn't noticed them yet. Young Sparrowhawk, who was staring coldly at the right, sent him a message and sneered. They're so King arrogant. Do they think we scouts are just decorations? They've entered the effective shooting range. Captain, when do we shoot? My hands are itching. The sniper is on my side. Shoot from 800 meters away. He doesn't dare to move any further. He's staying 800 meters away. Yi Qian adjusted the scope. Her cracked lips curled into a cold smile. The effective shooting range of her sniper rifle was 1,000 meters. His 800 meters really wasn't safe. Captain, the trigger guard on my sniper rifle isn't ready yet. It should be ready now, right? Yi Qian asked one last time. The gun in her hand was a little special. The 11-0 Malawian Quach's sniper rifle produced by Knight Ordnance Company was not suitable for use in the Arctic or cold regions. Snipers had to be careful when shooting with gloves on. When their fingers entered the trigger guard, they had to be very careful to not accidentally pull the trigger and cause the gun to go off accidentally. Therefore, Yi Qian removed the trigger guard. Her last question made her comrades in the Snowfield Brigade fall silent. Big Shark asked in surprise, "Why did you remove the trigger guard? If this thing is removed, how are you going to put it back?" This was something that could only be done by someone who specialized in military maintenance. Can you put it back? The big eel nodded. Yes, can be put back. Although Demon King Li Jinyan was surprised, he didn't immediately ask. His sister wasn't a reckless person, so she wouldn't make such a low-level mistake. But why did she think of removing the trigger guard of the sniper rifle? How did she do it? Could the trigger guard of the 11-0 Malawian Quach's sniper rifle be removed by itself? Later, they heard G3 sigh. I almost forgot that you're a professional military maintenance personnel. It's easy to remove the trigger guard of the sniper rifle in your hand. I only found out today that the trigger guard of the 11-0 Malawian Quach's sniper rifle can be removed by itself. My knowledge has increased again. Thank you. Thank you. Chapter 30:12. Big Shark, Big Eel, and Li Jinyan were stunned again. It was really the first time they knew that Yi Qian was a professional military equipment maintenance personnel. They had never heard Yi Qian mention it before. Xia Jinyuan smiled. You can install it now. It doesn't matter if it accidentally goes off, as long as it hits the target. Because Xia Jinyuan had spent time in the army deep in the mountains of Shuku village, he had entered the ammunition room where all kinds of firearms were stored. He learned some things from there, such as the trigger guard of the 11-0 Malawian Quach's sniper rifle, which could be removed by a professional military equipment maintenance personnel. Yi Qian received the order and nimbly installed the trigger guard. It might have been difficult for others, but for her, it was something she could do with her eyes closed. Okay, wait for the order to shoot, she immediately reported after installing the trigger guard. Li Jinyan couldn't help but laugh. He thought he already knew all about his sister's abilities, but who knew? He didn't fully understand it until today. She was actually a professional military equipment maintenance personnel. Yes, just as G3 said, his knowledge had increased. The entire SFS Border Defense Force entered the effective shooting range of the Chinese side, and the battle was about to begin. After Xia Jinyuan gave the order, Yi Jian, who was already prepared, used the sniper rifle in her hand to kill the SFS Border Defense Army sniper, who was 800 meters away from them. Gunshots rang out and stopped the SFS Border Defense Force's invasion. Don't be in a hurry to shoot. Just take out one every now and then, Xia Jinyuan instructed after Yi Qian fired the first shot. Gunshots came from above the city wall. Lieutenant Colonel Shalak had discovered Yi Qian's hiding spot and quickly counterattacked. Yi Qian did a beautiful somersault and jumped down from the broken wall. When she landed on her knees, she replied to Xia Jinyuan, "We've been discovered. We can't take out one every now and then." When she landed on the ground, the wound on her knee tore open and her calf muscles twitched in pain. As soon as he entered the battle, Yi Qian forgot about his pain and fatigue. Unable to stand up, he rolled on the ground and hid behind cover. When Lieutenant Colonel Sharuk heard the gunshots, he knew that they had been discovered by the Chinese team. He didn't hesitate. He had just finished his deployment, but he hadn't achieved the effect he wanted. Seeing the Chinese team open fire, Lieutenant Colonel Sharuk, who was a little embarrassed, immediately launched an attack. He didn't expect the Chinese side to discover them so quickly and fire from such a long distance. There was a distance of 800 meters between the castle and the soldier's death. The Chinese sniper hit their team member from 800 meters away. Needless to say, it must have been that Chinese female sniper. Assaulters break through the encirclement. Bomb squad, get ready. Sharpshooter Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk calmly commanded. At the same time, the rifle in his hand continuously fired at the castle's high ground. Yiqian only fired one shot. As a sharpshooter, Lieutenant Colonel Sharuk didn't discover her exact location. However, he had carefully observed the castle before and didn't discover her exact location. But from the positions of their own snipers, he could infer where the Chinese sniper might be hiding. Therefore, he immediately fired at the position where the Chinese sniper might be hiding. Lieutenant Colonel Sharuk was a sharpshooter. Naturally, he had his own skills and lived up to his reputation. Gritting his teeth, Lieutenant Colonel Sharuk didn't feel pity for the sacrifice of his own sniper. They were already close to the edge of the castle when the Chinese sniper killed their sniper. It was too late. Chapter 30:13. The hidden Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk's eyes glowed with a ferocious light. At this moment, the Chinese soldiers were enemies that must be eliminated. If he could, he really wanted to eliminate the people who had humiliated them along the way. Unfortunately, it was impossible. It was just a confrontation that would not kill anyone, and everything else was the same as a real battle. He had no way to truly eliminate the enemy. He could only return the favor. Just you wait, Chinese soldiers. You'll be able to rest soon. I'll let you have a good rest very soon. Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk, who was moving forward, gritted his teeth and muttered to himself in a cold voice. After receiving the order, the SFS Border Defense Army's explosives squad quickly entered effective combat range. Using their camouflage and advantageous terrain, they approached the right side of the castle and reported their position to Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk. Even when they entered effective combat range, they did not immediately throw grenades. They needed to get into the best combat position, which was the combat position they had designated before. Hearing the explosive squad approaching the edge of the castle, Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk gave another order. Throw 2 grenades at the same time. Use the rifles in your hands to open a path for me. The assaulters in the back rush out of the Chinese soldiers' line of fire. After entering effective combat range, the explosive squad of the SFS Border Defense Army received the order and moved even faster. The SFS Border Defense Army was indeed capable. They were responsible for border reconnaissance, intelligence gathering, anti-terrorist operations, and invasion operations. They often encountered offensive operations like this. Hiding on the right side of the castle, young Sparrow Hawk saw the trajectory of the enemy explosive squad. He was a scout and would not easily expose himself. Even when Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk fired at him, young Sparrow Hawk did not even move to dodge. He was very calm. Adjusting the focus of the binoculars in his hand, he said to his comrades, "It should be the explosive squad. Brothers guarding the gate, get ready. Don't let them finish us off quickly. Otherwise, we won't be able to catch turtles in a jar. Guard the gate well. Brothers will have a good time fighting down there." The G3 soldiers guarding the gate chuckled. Their guns were already set up, and they were just waiting for the people outside to obediently walk in. The images of the observation group attacking and defending had already been sent to the huge screen of the observation group. The castle was equipped with real-time surveillance cameras. At the same time, there were also cameramen sent by the Estonian troops to follow and record. The cameraman swept the camera up and paused on the Chinese scout. The cameraman, who wanted to capture the scout's facial expression, quickly realized that the Chinese scout had been in the same position the whole time, using binoculars to cover his face and only showing his chin. They're still filming. Lower your voices when you speak. Speak less nonsense and say more useful things. Xia Jinyuan, whose back could only be seen by the photographers, reminded his brothers not to talk too much. The more they talked, the more likely they would get into trouble. Right now, they were all purposely not noticing that the SFS Border Defense Forces were invading. If they said too much and were captured by a camera, it would be the same as exposing themselves. The Snowfield Brigade would not let themselves be completely exposed, let alone let the observation group see them. As the trump card of the Chinese Special Forces, even Major General Yang was a little uncertain about their strength. They had no direct superiors and no subordinate troops. A troop that came and went without a trace, like a shadow. As for their strength, it could be seen from Yi Qian. Chapter 30:14. Yi Qian was trained by a world-class sniper and a first-grade sergeant major. Even so, she hadn't officially stepped into the Snowfield Brigade for many years. She was just a reserve Snowfield Brigade soldier. With such harsh recruitment requirements, those who were not strong would be rejected at the door. The IKA assault competition was indeed very practical. The rules were abnormally cruel. The team members had to walk out of a primitive forest that even explorers wouldn't casually enter for 5 days and 4 nights. The long-distance raid was more than 180 kilometers, but it wasn't a real battle after all. It wasn't a real battle competition. As the top special forces of China, if they really showed their strength, it was enough to compete with the top 3 special forces of China, the United States, and the United Kingdom. For the sake of learning, the Chinese soldiers who kept a low profile went through nearly 100 hours of marching. The strength they showed was actually average. Other than Yi Qian, there wasn't anything special to speak of. This was a fact acknowledged by the entire observation team, and it made Colonel Amitabh very happy. Especially now. He was even happier. The Chinese side still hasn't discovered the approaching explosives expert. Their scouts are too much of a failure. Now, they've given the SFS Border Defense Force a chance to overtake them. What a pity. It's already the last segment of the competition. Their failure will cause them to fall behind by at least 10 points. A foreign general who was somewhat optimistic about the Chinese soldiers looked at the big screen and shook his head regretfully. It was really too much of a pity. The Chinese side has been constantly moving forward to open up the time gap with the SFS Border Defense Force. They're also ranked 5th with a weak score. The SFS Border Defense Force is a very strong force in their country. It's normal for them to overtake the Chinese side. Yes, the SFS Border Defense Force has performed very well in the previous years. This year, they dropped out of the top 4 because of Italy's participation. Now that they have a chance to overtake the Chinese soldiers, they'll definitely do their best. The Chinese soldiers' performance is very good. However, I don't have high hopes for the Chinese team members. I didn't have high hopes for them from the beginning. General Kallisler looked at the big screen and heard these words. A cold smile appeared on his face. The general who said these words was from a country that had good relations with the United States. They didn't have high hopes for the Chinese team members only because they felt pressure from the Chinese side. General, the Chinese side. The officer beside him wanted to say something in a low voice, but General Kallisler raised his hand to stop him from continuing. Keep watching. You'll see something interesting. Yes, General. When the accompanying officers heard this, they didn't say anything else. They remained silent and watched the big screen together with their general. The moment the battle started, it became 8 versus 7. The Chinese side won a small victory at the beginning, and the generals who approved of the Chinese side didn't say anything. The Italian general, Colonel Leonardo, raised his eyebrows. He didn't understand why these people were so stubborn about the strength of the Chinese team. For the first time, the Chinese side had always been ahead of the SFS Border Defense Force, who had participated in the IKA assault competition 3 times. Even if they had always been ahead by a small margin, it was still a lead. Therefore, he never thought that the Chinese side was weaker than the SFS Border Defense Force. This was a fact that could be seen with one's eyes. What was there to argue about? He really couldn't understand it. On the big screen, the SFS Border Defense Forces first pressed forward with bullets. Using the advantageous terrain outside, they approached the castle bit by bit. Chapter 30:15. In order to win back his lost face, Colonel Shaluk's deployment was very fierce. He directly suppressed the enemy with firepower. When the assaulters were very close to the castle entrance, Colonel Shaluk shouted, "Grenades attack! Advance!" One of their members had already been eliminated, but it didn't affect Colonel Shaluk too much. They had only lost one of their 8 members so far. Compared to the countries behind them, they were much stronger. At the very least, each of their members still had a penalty slip in their pocket. None of their members had been eliminated because of their penalty slip. Among the countries behind them, half of them had already been eliminated. Only the other half continued to advance. Just as Colonel Shylock shouted, "Grenades attack!" Young Sparrow Hawk, who had been observing the situation, sneered and informed his comrades below. "The explosives team has already made their move. The assaulters are ready." As soon as he finished speaking, 2 grenades exploded. Using the smoke from the grenades, the SFS assaulters suppressed the enemy from both sides and helped the explosives team enter the castle entrance. Colonel Amitabu originally thought that the 2 grenades would definitely kill the 2 Chinese team members guarding the entrance. Who would have thought that the moment the grenades were thrown, the hidden Chinese team members dodged them at the last moment? The grenades landed and exploded. The sensors in the vests of the 2 Chinese team members didn't sound. No sound meant that they weren't killed. Colonel Amitabu, who was full of anticipation, cursed fiercely. Damn it, their luck was too good. They actually dodged the grenades when they were thrown. They actually dodged them. Damn it. Seeing this, a faint smile appeared on General Callisler's face. He said to the accompanying officer, "They're very strong, aren't they? The show has only just begun. The SFS border guards won't overtake the Chinese team." They dodged in time. The accompanying officer nodded. "Very lucky." General Callisler laughed in response. "Lucky? There's no such thing as luck on the battlefield. There's only skilled combat tactics. Can you win by relying on luck?" Colonel Amitabu didn't think it was tactics, but luck. It was luck that allowed the Chinese team members to dodge. His eyes were bloodshot as he stared at the screen. Now was the time for Shylock to charge into the castle. As long as Shylock could reach the castle, Shylock would have hope. The Chinese side wouldn't give the SFS Border Defense Forces a chance to enter the castle so easily. If the SFS Border Defense Forces were to enter the castle so easily, it would seem like catching a turtle in a jar. The 2 explosives operators who had entered the entrance were immobilized by the Chinese bullets, and there was no way for them to move forward. When Lieutenant Colonel Shylock received their report, he replied calmly, "We don't have much ammunition on us, just like them. After we run out of ammunition, they won't be able to shoot at us anymore." Due to the forceful attack and defense of their positions, the ammunition allocated to the participants of each country was limited. After the battle, there would be no more supplies. In the end, they would have to rely on fighting to complete the final competition. Hand-to-hand combat was also a small subject in this competition. Both sides had to have a hand-to-hand combat, and the prerequisite for the hand-to-hand combat was that all members of both sides had run out of bullets. He had to use up all his bullets and not leave a single one behind. After a fierce battle, the Sparrow Hawk in the sky opened fire. The electronic notification sounded. Another member of the SFS Border Defense Forces had been eliminated. Colonel Amitabu gritted his teeth so hard that they were about to break. Chapter 30:16. The SFS Border Defense Forces assaulters who were close to the edge of the castle immediately fired up high to provide cover for the team members behind them as they approached the castle. When Lieutenant Colonel Shylock knew that another team member had died, the viciousness in his eyes deepened. "Let's fight another round. It's almost time for us to engage in hand-to-hand combat." Li Jinyan, who did not waste a single bullet, said calmly. He was in the second sniper's position and had hidden himself very well. And the target of his sniping was none other than Lieutenant Colonel Shylock. A cold wind blew through the castle, and when it entered the narrow space, it emitted a sound that sounded like the wailing of ghosts and howling of wolves. It was as if countless wandering souls were crying, and it gave off an eerie feeling that made one's hair stand on end. 2 of the SFS Border Defense Forces bomb squad members had already entered the castle. They threw the last grenades they had at the gunpoint. Holy shit! When the T6 combatant saw the grenades falling from the sky, he picked up his rifle and jumped toward the pile of rocks on the other side. He was just a hair's breadth away from being killed in action. After hiding well, he raised his rifle and fired at the entrance again. With a vicious look in his eyes, he said in a low voice, "It's about time. The 2 bomb squad members have run out of bullets. Retreat and lengthen the battle. Let's finish off their last bullet." Xia Jinyuan, who was in command of the entire battle, began to retreat according to the original route, so that the SFS border defense forces would think that the Chinese side had been defeated and wait for an opportunity to break through. As they retreated, Shaluk took the bait. In order to enter the castle and eliminate the Chinese team members as soon as possible, Shaluk had been attacking fiercely from the beginning. Now, it was time for them to run out of bullets. Li Jingyan, who was hiding, made his move. He aimed the black muzzle of his gun at the entrance of the castle and began the Chinese side's last line of defense. This was also a declaration of war. It was telling the SFS border defense forces that they had run out of bullets, while the Chinese side did not defend with all their might and showed mercy. Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk naturally understood. It was precisely because he understood that his aura was even gloomier than the sky. It was as if there were dark clouds hanging over his head. At 4:20 p.m., the sky became even gloomier. There was still more than an hour and 40 minutes until the end of the competition at 6 p.m. It could be said that the entire competition was coming to an end. The teams from the other countries had also begun to attack, but they were not all in the castle. Instead, they were in another position to complete the confrontation. The sound of bullets and artillery fire could be heard from the depths of the forest. The confrontation between Italy and Estonia at entrance B had ended. They did not stop and started their final charge with the sound of artillery fire. Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk rushed into the castle with 5 members. Both sides had run out of ammunition and had begun the final battle. After 5 days and 4 nights of running 180 kilometers, the physical strength of his hands had reached the limit. Now that he was going to fight again, it was a battle of strength and perseverance. Fists collided with fists. The raised leg collided fiercely with the kicked leg. The heavy military boots kicked on the calf bone. It was so painful that when he retracted his leg, his calf was trembling violently. The special forces of the Shuiyu Brigade liked to launch sneak attacks, so they used fighting techniques that were filled with killing intent. Every move was a practical move that was fatal. Every punch and kick was incomparably sharp. When the kick swept over, it created a strong gust of wind that made a whoosh sound. It was quite powerful. When the wind from the punch brushed past the SFS Border Defense Forces' faces, it was enough to deform them. The SFS Border Defense Forces used pure Western hand-to-hand combat. Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk's hand-to-hand combat incorporated Muay Thai. This was a sport known for its strength and agility. It mainly used the human body's fists, legs, knees, elbows, and forelimbs as 8 weapons to attack. The attack power was so strong that one punch could break a person's bones. Chapter 30:17. Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk combined Western fighting skills with Muay Thai moves. Every move was extremely fierce. His fists even hit Xia Jinyuan's neck viciously. If the neck was hit by a fist, the victim would cough and have difficulty breathing. If the force was too strong, the victim's cervical vertebrae would be dislocated and fractured, which would be life-threatening. He did it on purpose. Xia Jinyuan and Shaluk fought for 1 round, and he could see the opponent's malice. As the king of all soldiers, Xia Jinyuan was naturally not weak in fighting skills. Facing Shaluk's malicious moves, he dealt with them calmly without feeling embarrassed. The Estonian cameraman following them naturally aimed the camera at the captains of the 2 teams so that the generals of the observation group could see the exciting fight through his lens. Shaluk punched Xia Jinyuan's neck twice. The generals of the observation group naturally saw his malice, but no one stopped him. It was a contest, and it depended on the individual's strength. After 3 rounds, Shaluk didn't gain any advantage. His calves, legs, and chest were all hit by Xia Jinyuan's long legs and fists. The force was so strong that his chest hurt and he couldn't breathe. I've always wanted to experience the elegance of the Chinese soldiers. Captain of the Chinese team, I hope you won't disappoint me. Rubbing his chest, Shaluk's attacks became more vicious. The rules of the fighting course were: lock the opponent's legs, remove the armband on the opponent's arm, and hold the opponent down so that he can't move for at least 10 seconds. Xia Jinyuan also began to attack, but it wasn't the kind of attack that killed the opponent immediately. Instead, it was an attack that dragged out the fight a little longer. He was the captain of the Snowfield Brigade, one of the best in the Special Forces, and one of the few top Special Forces who had completed nearly 40 cruel and merciless special training courses. In the face of Shaluk's insidious attacks, he was calm in his heart, but his hands and legs were merciless. He fought as he should. Modesty and courtesy were virtues, but if someone bullied you, and you happened to have enough strength to fight back, then you must not be merciful. This was what his little fox once said. It made sense. After the competition, he had to tell his comrades. The SFS Border Defense only had 6 people, while the Chinese side had 8. In a one-on-one battle, there were still 2 people left. One of them was Yi Qian, and the other was Li Jinyan. Li Jinyan had Xia Jinyuan on the field. If he went on the field as well, his strength would be exposed. As for Yi Qian, the observation team saw that other than her sniping skills, she was mediocre in all other aspects, so they did not participate. She was a good fighter, and when she fought, she would forget herself. Therefore, she stood to the side and did not make a move. She chose to watch. Probably because the observation distance was too close, one of the SFS soldiers who had been kicked to the ground by a G3 soldier was afraid that his armband would be torn off. In a moment of desperation, he rolled a few times, and in the blink of an eye, he was only 3 meters away from Yi Qian. Yi Qian saw this dark-skinned, well-featured soldier sneak up on her. It was a matter of whether to fight or not. They were all asking for trouble. Yi Qian felt that if she didn't make a move, she would be letting down the opponent's ferocity. She twisted her toes on the ground and moved her limbs. Just as her opponent was about to punch her, Yi Jian let out a low grunt. Taking advantage of the fact that the cameraman's lens wasn't aimed at her, Yi Jian quickly swept her long and straight leg across. Chapter 30:18. Bang! The SFS Border Defense soldier who thought he had picked a soft persimmon was sent flying by Yi Qian and fell to the ground once again. This time, G3 picked up a ready-made target. Like a ferocious tiger released from its cage, G3 instantly twisted the man's arm behind his back and ripped off his armband at the same time. With his armband ripped off, half of the Border Defense soldier's face was pressed against the ground by G3. After 10 seconds, G3 let go and half of the Border Defense soldier's face was covered in uneven bruises. Very good, another one down. Then, there were only 5 SFS Border Defense soldiers left. This turn of events left the dead SFS border guard a little stunned. His lower abdomen throbbed with pain, and he couldn't get up from the ground for a long time. With some effort, he raised his head to look at the female soldier who had sent him flying with a kick. Just now, was she the one who sent him flying? He couldn't accept that a male soldier like him was sent flying by a female soldier. Yi Qian's kick was fast and fierce. Although the 2 cameramen were using wide-angle lenses because she and Li Jinyan were standing on the side watching the fight, the cameraman only gave 2 shots to the general of the observation team to let him know that 2 of the Chinese team members weren't participating in the fight. Then, it didn't zoom in again. Therefore, Yi Qian's kick wasn't captured by the camera. Only the unlucky soldier who tried to attack Yi Qian appeared in the camera, as if he was flying. The cameraman didn't even notice who sent the SFS Border Defense soldier flying. The referees and military officials at the scene were all focused on the 2 teams fighting and didn't pay much attention to the 2 Chinese Special Forces soldiers standing on the sidelines. It wasn't until the unlucky soldier who was sent flying appeared in their line of sight that they quickly looked over. Li Jinyan was next to Yi Qian. After the cameramen, referees, and military officials scanned the 2 of them, they naturally thought that it was Li Jinyan who did it. One of them was actually aiming at Li Jinyan. G3 retreated and didn't participate in the fight. Soon, the Shao retreated and also didn't participate in the fight. He and his opponent fought to a draw. After 10 seconds, the referee declared it a draw and no points were taken into account. The Shao kicked his opponent's knee. When his opponent fell to the ground, the Shao twisted his opponent's arm and tore off his armband. Then, he locked his opponent down for 10 seconds. After T6, he shook hands with his opponent and retreated from the fight. At this point, only Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk of the SFS was still fighting tenaciously. Seeing his comrades fall one by one, Lieutenant Colonel Sherlock roared even louder and more ferociously. Their powerful SFS border defense forces had been defeated by the cowardly Central Army. What a humiliation! What a humiliation! Xia Jinyuan, who had been pushed back several steps by Sherlock's kick, started his final attack. When Sherlock raised his leg again, Xia Jinyuan didn't retreat anymore. Instead, he dodged to one side. At the same time, he grabbed Sherlock's calf with both hands and fiercely pulled it forward. Sherlock couldn't stabilize his lower body at once and fell forward. You think I'm weak? Lieutenant Colonel Sherlock, I really want to know how you feel right now. I'm the one who pulled off your armband. Your so-called strong strength is nothing in my eyes. Xia Jinyuan held Sherlock's neck with one hand and locked Sherlock's left hand behind his back with the other. Sherlock couldn't fight back at all. Chapter 30:19. Sherlock's eyes widened in anger as he roared violently. He wanted to break free from his shackles. He wanted to turn defeat into victory. But no matter how hard he struggled, he couldn't break free. It was like there was a mountain on top of him, and he was like an ant on the mountain, so small that he couldn't move the mountain at all. At this moment, Sherlock's mind was in a mess, a complete mess. Rip! Lieutenant Colonel Xia tore off the armband on Sherlock's arm and used his strength to crush this arrogant and despicable guy who had been humiliating the Chinese side. The cameras at the venue were already focused on the captains of the two teams. They immediately transmitted the scene of the battle to the large screen where the observers were watching. The Chinese team's captain used 15 minutes to pin the SFS Border Defense Forces captain, Lieutenant Colonel Sherlock, to the ground like he was a chicken. Sherlock, who had always thought he could easily defeat the Chinese side and didn't care about the Chinese side at all, became a joke. When Colonel Amitabhu saw this scene, his face twisted into a terrifying expression. From the moment Yi Qian sniped the first SFS Border Defense Force soldier, Colonel Amitabhu's face was twisted. Then, one after another, the SFS Border Defense Force soldiers were defeated by the Chinese team. Colonel Amitabhu, who was watching with his own eyes, felt tormented. When an SFS Border Defense Force soldier was kicked in a screen, Colonel Amitabhu's face was as ferocious as a demon's. His entire body exuded a cold and sinister aura. Who was it that kicked their soldier away? The camera flashed and stopped at one place. He saw a female Chinese soldier and a male soldier. The two of them were standing there, calmly observing. It was impossible to tell who had kicked their soldier. The camera was no longer focused on them. Instead, it focused on the captains of the two teams who were still in the middle of the battle. Colonel Amitabhu, who was desperate for hope, saw a scene that shot through his heart like a bullet, shattering all of his hopes. But at this point, the twisted Colonel Amitabhu still had hope. He hoped that Sherlock would succeed in his counterattack. He was too eager to see Sherlock succeed in his counterattack. But as an observer, he couldn't help his country's soldiers. At the most critical moment of the battle, he saw the Chinese soldiers once again knock Sherlock down to the ground with his whole body tense. Shocked, angry, and anxious, he clenched one hand into a fist and continuously punched the palm of his other hand, making a pa-pa sound when he hit the palm, which attracted the attention of several nearby generals. Lieutenant Colonel Sherlock, stand up. You must stand up. You're my last hope. Don't disappoint me. Don't disappoint me. Colonel Amitabhu stared at the screen so hard that even his voice was distorted. He really hoped that the screen would show the Chinese soldiers being beaten up by the soldiers of his own country. He hoped so much. However, the reality wasn't what he wanted to see. What he saw was Lieutenant Colonel Sherlock's armband, which represented his country, was torn off by the Chinese soldiers. 10 seconds had passed since the armband was torn off, and it was clear who had won and who had lost. Colonel Amitabhu watched as the small, miniature version of his country's national flag was torn off. In that second, he felt blood rush up his throat and his face contorted. They had lost, they had lost, they had actually lost. Chapter 30:20. They didn't lose to the US, Italy, or other countries with powerful military forces. Instead, they lost to China, which they had always looked down on. They lost to a group of cowardly Chinese soldiers. This was a result that they had never expected. They had never thought that they would lose to the Chinese side that they had looked down on. They never thought this would happen. Facing this result, Colonel Amitabha felt like he was struck by lightning. His shoulders drooped, and he stood there motionlessly, emitting an aura of defeat. Colonel Amitabha, I'm very sorry that you lost. Colonel Leonardo, from Italy, was the first to express his condolences. He comforted Colonel Amitabha with a regretful expression. Colonel, this is only a competition. It's nothing special. This is only a competition to stop you from being so arrogant. Colonel Leonardo finished his sentence in his mind. Colonel Amitabha, who couldn't accept the buzzing in his head, suddenly turned around and stared at Colonel Amitabha. We lost. These guys can't help but laugh at us. He clenched his fists so tightly that his knuckles cracked. Only then was he able to restrain the anger in his chest from pouring out. Colonel Amitabha coldly stared at the blonde, brown-eyed Colonel Amitabha. He lifted his chin and said arrogantly, That's right, it's only a competition. It's nothing special. We won't take it to heart. Colonel Amitabha used words to maintain his arrogance, but the look in his eyes already exposed his emotions. Anger, unwillingness, humiliation, hatred, all kinds of negative emotions hit his heart like a flood. He still couldn't accept that they lost to the Chinese soldiers that he looked down on. Colonel Leonardo saw that Colonel Amitabha was clearly extremely angry, but he still pretended like he didn't care. He couldn't help but laugh. Yes, it's nothing special. I hope you're happy today, Colonel Amitabha. The blatant mockery made Colonel Amitabha so angry that his clenched fists trembled. Colonel Leonardo saw this, and the mockery on his face deepened. He turned around and showed his back to the loser. If the SFS border guards didn't try to instigate their country's headgear commandos to target the Chinese soldiers, then his attitude would definitely be very polite. That was a problem between China and the country the SFS Border Defense Corps was loyal to. It had nothing to do with Italy, and the SFS Border Defense Corps shouldn't try to use despicable means to get Italy to act against China. Since they dared to scheme against Yifeng, then don't blame him for being impolite. Colonel Leonardo walked away with a smile, leaving Colonel Amitabha trembling in anger as he stared at the foreign general who mocked them. At this moment, Colonel Amitabha's sense of humiliation reached an unprecedented height. Just because they lost, these people dared to come over and humiliate him. Damn it, Colonel Amitabha couldn't find any other way to vent his anger. He could only curse again and again in an attempt to make himself feel better. Only he knew whether he was doing well or not. However, the generals of the other countries knew that he must not be having a good time. General Hywell looked at Colonel Amitabha, who was even more arrogant than the Americans, and cursed in his mind, "Stupid guy." He thought for a bit and walked over. They still had a cooperative relationship, so he should go over and comfort him. Chapter 3021. In addition, there was a meeting between the leaders of both countries next month. The relationship between the two countries still needed to be maintained. For the benefit of both countries, he should go and comfort Colonel Amitabha, who was very upset. Colonel Amitabha was comforted by General Hywell, but Lieutenant Colonel Sharuk, who had been knocked down, was not so lucky. No one would comfort him on the battlefield. Xia Jinyuan, who had let go of Sharuk, stood up and stretched out his hand in a very gentlemanly manner. He wanted to help Sharuk up. The competition is over, Lieutenant Colonel Sharuk. I'm sorry for what happened just now. You must have hurt, Xia Jinyuan said, but he did not think that Sharuk would extend his hand and let him help him up. If he didn't, then that was his business. It was his fault for being rude. It had nothing to do with the Chinese side. Xia Jinyuan, who had grown up in a powerful family, would never behave rudely in public. Especially now, he would maintain a very good demeanor and be polite, showing the demeanor of a powerful country. Sharuk, who had lost, was furious. The words that the Chinese soldier said before tearing off his armband were clearly meant to humiliate him. After humiliating him, he stretched out his hand. Did he think that he was a dog wagging its tail and begging for mercy? So what if you won? You're just a special forces soldier who was carefully selected by your country to participate in the competition. Behind you are thousands of cowardly and incompetent soldiers. You may have won against me today, but your country will never win against us." Shahrukh deliberately avoided facing the camera. He turned his head and faced the camera with the back of his head. Like Colonel Amitabh, he used words to defend his arrogance. "It's just a competition. We don't care about it at all." Well, it was just a competition. There was no need to care about it. Anyway, all the other countries saw it. Xia Jinyuan smiled and raised his eyebrows. There was a hint of surprise on his face. Soon, the generals realized why Shahrukh would rather turn his head than show his face, because once again, he had said something that offended her. Heh, he still has the face to say offensive words to the Chinese side after losing like this. It seems that he hasn't been beaten enough. Lieutenant Colonel Shahrukh, who spoke fluent Chinese, did not know that he had once again embarrassed himself in front of everyone. He had let the generals of various countries experience together how narrow-minded he was. He was really narrow-minded to the point that he deserved a beating. The Chinese soldiers did not seize the opportunity to teach this kind of person a lesson. It was their magnanimity. With a casual move, Xia Jinyuan tricked Lieutenant Colonel Shalak again. Hence, he smiled slightly and raised his arm. The Chinese team member headed towards the finish line. At 5:17 in the afternoon, they supported each other and dragged their numb legs through the last of the forest. They stepped on the last of the thick leaves and walked out of the forest against the wind and rain. As the sky darkened, the Chinese soldiers stepped out of the dark sky and appeared in the sights of the special forces of the other four countries who were already waiting at the finish line. Applause rang out, applauding for the Chinese side's persistence and congratulating them on their victory. If we hadn't deliberately stalled for time and deliberately avoided the direction of the shooting, would we have been standing at the finish line and waiting for the next contestant from another country to appear from the forest? T6 said in a low voice. There was a hint of anticipation in his relaxed tone. Chapter 30:22. I think so. If it's regrettable, we'll win back our ranking next time. Young Sparrow Hawk, who came out with him, replied with a smile. There was also a hint of anticipation in his expression. The 8 team members were not too far apart from each other, so the conversation between T6 and Young Sparrow Hawk was clearly heard by the other team members. As the team leader, Xia Jinyuan replied to the two of them, "The next time we come, it will be other comrades. At that time, I hope that they won't be here to learn or to maintain their mediocrity. At that time, I hope that they will fight with all their strength. At that time, I hope that our country will become stronger, wealthier, and have an unshakable position on the international stage that other countries will not dare to provoke. Poor people have no dignity, and poor countries have no status. I hope that at that time, China, a country with thousands of years of civilization, will soar like a dragon. This is a hope, but also an absolute. China became the 5th participating country to arrive at the final station and became the dark horse of this year's IKA assault. It also squeezed the SFS Border Defense Force out of the top 5 and became the biggest highlight of this year's competition. Only then did the generals of the Western countries, who had once looked down on China, realize that before they knew it, China had already risen. Although it was still far from being a developed country, it was undeniable that China's strength was much stronger than before. Congratulations, guys, you've won beautifully. Your outstanding performance has shattered our previous views. Chinese soldiers, Chinese comrades, you're not weak at all. I'm really happy for you, especially when I saw that you guys used your strength to defeat the arrogant SFS Border Defense Force. Well done, Chinese soldiers. The Italian and American Special Forces were the first to gather around and enthusiastically congratulated China on their victory. You guys have really impressed us. You actually squeezed the SFS Border Defense Force out of the top 5. Ha ha, buddy. Tell me, how do you feel right now? When the American sniper who had said a few days ago that he wanted to compete with Yi Qian asked this question, Yi Qian replied with a smile, I feel great. Although my results aren't as good as yours, I enjoy the feeling of victory. Because she was the only female soldier participating in the competition, There were more cameras focused on her now. No one could see the true face of her painted face, but her clear black and white eyes, cold and hard like snow mountains, were enough to attract the attention of many people. Yi Qian's figure appeared on the screen. Her words were also heard by the generals of the various nations. Colonel Amitabhu, who had just caught his breath, felt humiliated once more. He had to maintain his composure. He couldn't afford to be rude with Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk anymore. The senior colonel felt humiliated. He straightened his back and tried to show that he didn't care about being squeezed out of the top 5. Yes, they didn't care at all. It was just a competition. They didn't need to care too much about it. No matter what the Chinese soldiers say, let them say it. The talkative people could only say it with their mouths. Who asked them to be so weak? Colonel Amitabhu only felt a little better when he thought about it this way. Then he thought about his country's current weapons and equipment, and their aircraft carriers patrolling the Indian Ocean. Then he thought about how there was nothing in China's sea. Colonel Amitabhu felt a little better. Chapter 3023. It wasn't that they lost, but that they chose the wrong person. They shouldn't have let Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk lead the team. It was his mistake that caused the defeat of the SFS Border Defense Force. After returning to China, he needed to report the situation to the president and improve the training of the SFS Border Defense Force. Before he returned, Colonel Amitabhu was already reflecting deeply on his decision. He believed that China was in the top 5 because they chose the most elite special forces of their country. His country didn't specially choose them and only sent the SFS Border Defense Force, which wasn't the best. Therefore, they lost. What Colonel Amitabhu was thinking also represented the thoughts of some Western countries that still held prejudice against China. In their eyes, China was a backward country that had only won the anti-Japanese war a few decades ago. It was impossible for China to suddenly become a powerful country with great military strength. Prejudice didn't exist for a day or two, especially since China hadn't fought a war with other countries for decades. Many countries and media didn't know the actual combat power of China's military. Moreover, China was used to keeping a low profile and adhering to the principle of keeping their heads down to make a fortune. They deliberately hid their actual combat power, so the Western countries that were biased against China couldn't understand it. Therefore, the existence of prejudice was normal. Xia Jinyuan led the team. Although he didn't completely erase the prejudice, it was enough to let the other countries know that China's strength wasn't as weak as they thought. The prejudice still existed, but it wasn't so extreme. The real combat power of China's special forces continued to be like a veiled girl. It wouldn't be easy for others to find out. They quietly made a fortune, quietly strengthened the country, quietly continued to develop, and finally, once they made a move, the world would be shocked. The venue's cameraman interviewed an Italian commando and asked him what he thought of the performance of the Chinese military. The commando answered seriously, "Their appearance made me realize that the Chinese military that I thought of before didn't exist at all. I have to admit how ridiculous my previous perception was." Although prejudice existed, it was enough as long as it could be changed. At the award ceremony, the commander-in-chief of the Estonian National Defense Force said to Xia Jinyuan, "You used your strength to win respect. The ranking you obtained wasn't just a ranking. It changed the prejudice of many people against China's military. At the same time, I apologize for weighing your luggage. I'm very, very sorry. Use me for the first battle. Use me, and I will definitely win." The Chinese soldiers who represented their country received an apology from the commander-in-chief of the host country's national defense. They used their strength to prove that the Chinese soldiers were not inferior to any country's special forces. That's right, the ranking was not just a ranking. It was also used to defend the dignity of the motherland. Those who humiliate our country must be repaid. This was the Chinese Special Forces' way of returning the favor to the SFS Border Defense Army. They wanted them to understand that they shouldn't embarrass themselves so easily. 12 countries participated in the competition, and 2 Western countries withdrew. In the end, only 10 countries remained, and they were now ranked 5th. Although their results were not amazing, and their subject scores were still far from the first, second, third, and fourth place, they were able to suppress the SFS Border Defense Force and obtain the result that Xia Jinyuan and the others wanted. And this time, it was the first step for the Chinese Special Forces to walk out of the country. As the captain of the Navy's amphibious commando, Li Jinyin learned a lot. Chapter 3024. When Lieutenant Colonel Sharuk heard the apology from the Commander-in-Chief of the Estonian National Defense Force, his face turned ashen. Occasionally, he would glance at the Chinese soldiers with a gloomy look. He was so angry that he didn't even dare to approach his comrades. Yi Qian received an individual medal because of her outstanding performance. This was a very valuable medal. Among the 8 contestants, only Yi Qian received it. The rest of the team received a collective medal. Naturally, it wasn't as valuable as an individual medal. Seeing Yi Qian receive an individual medal, the 7 comrades gave her a warm round of applause. This was the medal that Yi Qian deserved. Her outstanding performance had won honor for the country and the respect of the other countries' special forces. Good job, our female soldier. The award ceremony was held directly at the end of the competition. The soldiers of each country took a transport plane and left the eastern forest of Estonia at 9 p.m. local time. On the plane, the Chinese team members communicated with the other countries' special forces in fluent English. The atmosphere was very harmonious. Even though everyone was so tired that they couldn't even lift their hands, they were still in high spirits. They didn't fall asleep as soon as they boarded the plane like the SFS Border Defense Force members. Communication was the best way to close the gap between people. The Chinese team's polite and gentle attitude won them praise again during the 2-hour flight back to the city. Great Chinese soldiers. The SFS Border Defense Force members were suffering, especially when they heard the Western countries' praise of the Chinese soldiers. It was like a sharp knife constantly cutting into their hearts, making them suffer every minute and every second. 5 days ago, they had wantonly announced that the Chinese soldiers were weak and easily bullied. They didn't have any strength to speak of. 5 days later, what they had said was undoubtedly the biggest joke. Who was weak and easily bullied? Who didn't have strength to speak of? In this competition, the winner was decided. They didn't dare to speak anymore. They shrank into the corner of the transport plane and tried to minimize their presence. The voices praising the Chinese soldiers were so harsh. They really wanted to shut them all up. In the darkness, Lieutenant Colonel Sharuk's gloomy gaze fell on Yi Qian. Under the dim lights of the cabin, the Chinese female soldier was communicating with the special forces from a nation of islands. From time to time, they would gesture as if they were analyzing something. It was because of her existence that he had made such a big fool of himself. Sharuk looked away and lowered his eyes to hide the haze in them. Chinese female soldier, don't let me see you again. If I see you again, it will be your death. 2 hours later, the transport plane arrived at the military airport outside the city. The special forces from the 12 countries got off the plane one by one. If there's a chance, you're welcome to visit our country. But I hope to fight with you again in a competition. The American Special Forces soldier hugged Yi Jin gently like a gentleman. They had been conquered by the female soldier from China, a female soldier who was even stronger than the male soldiers. Yi Jin was actually not used to this kind of Western hug, but when in Rome, do as the Romans do. She could only face it with a smile. I also look forward to communicating with you again next time. And the Chinese ambassador in the embassy of Estonia welcomed the Chinese special forces. They already knew that the Chinese soldiers had won a place in the competition. One of the female soldiers had even won a personal medal. When the news reached the embassy immediately called back. By now, the country also knew and cheered for the performance of the female soldier. Chapter 3025. Ambassador Qin Dingkong from the embassy in Estonia personally came to welcome them with flowers in his hands. When the Chinese special forces came over, he immediately presented the flowers to them. Dressed in a suit and leather shoes, Ambassador Qin stood in the military airport corridor. When he heard the sound of steady and powerful footsteps coming from the corridor exclusive to the Chinese Special Forces, he immediately led 3 staff members to welcome them. A group of young soldiers wearing their own country's jungle camouflage walked out from the corner. Even though they were in a foreign country, they strictly followed the rule of 3 people. The 8 of them walked in a neat and orderly line. Every step they took revealed the fierce military power of the Chinese military. Their momentum was as lofty as a mountain, making people immediately feel the power of the military. For 5 days and 4 nights, they passed through the harshest eastern forest of Estonia with very little rest. They represented all the Chinese military and used their strength to prove to the world that the Chinese military dared to show their bravery and fighting spirit to the strong. Ambassador Qin Dingkong quickened his pace. He had the national emblem of China pinned on his chest. Before he could introduce himself, Xia Jinyuan, who was walking in front, immediately knew the identity of the visitor. They were all staff members from the embassy in Estonia. As he walked closer, Xia Jinyuan couldn't help but squint slightly. The staff member who came with the flowers was not an ordinary staff member. He was the ambassador to Estonia, Ambassador Qin Dingkong. He also had another identity, the father of his rival in love, Qin Xiu. He didn't expect to be welcomed by Ambassador Qin in person. "Line up," Xia Jinyuan said in a deep voice. His comrades behind him immediately walked in unison, 1, 2, 3, and stood at attention. "Salute." Ambassador Qin Dingkong walked over. Xia Jinyuan straightened his back. Under his command, his comrades raised their hands and saluted in unison, as if they were the same person saluting the ambassador who welcomed them. "Congratulations." Ambassador Qin Dingkong presented the flowers to the young soldiers who saluted him. Looking at the young soldiers in front of him, whose faces were smeared with oil paint, he felt that their eyes were sharp. Even Ambassador Qin, who had been through a lot, felt that his eyes were a little red. "Thank you for your hard work. I've already sent a call back to China about your excellent results. The highest leader in the Great Hall has asked about it personally and asked me to thank you on behalf of him, the country, and the people. Thank you for your hard work." This was the first time that a Chinese soldier had gone abroad for a competition. They had achieved good results in the first competition. A female soldier had even won a personal medal, which was very difficult to obtain. Facing the young soldiers who had won glory for the country, Ambassador Qin Dingkong could not calm down for a long time. When they were overseas, what they hoped for the most was to bring glory to their country. Today, the young soldier had done it. He was truly happy for them. Xia Jinyuan straightened his back and stood as straight as a pole. He was neither arrogant nor superficial as he answered firmly, "It's not hard at all. This is what we should do. Because we are soldiers. A soldier who was born to fight for his country." Ambassador Qin Dingkong's gaze fell on the only female soldier in all the participating teams. He offered the flowers in his hand to the female soldier. The highest leader specially emphasized that he is proud of you as a female soldier. You are the pride of our Chinese female soldiers. You are a role model that the entire army should learn from. The praise from the highest leader in the Great Hall was no longer as ordinary as personal glory. For the older generation, it was definitely a great event that brought glory to their ancestors. Chapter 30:26. Yi Qian received the flowers for the first time in her life. With clear eyes, she replied to Ambassador Qin Dingkong, "This is what a soldier should do." There was no need for too much gratitude. She had put on the military uniform, so everything she did was her duty. She was neither arrogant nor rash. She had the pride of a pine tree and the coldness of a plum blossom. She looked soft like water, but was actually thin. Ambassador Qin Dingkong only needed to take one look to have a deep impression of this female soldier. A soldier should be just like her. Ambassador Qin Dingkong's gaze changed slightly when he looked at Yi Qian. Her face was also covered with paint like the male soldiers. At this moment, her facial features could not be seen at all. He could not even tell how old she was. But at this moment, he could hear it from her voice. There was still a trace of childishness in her voice. Through her clear eyes that were untainted by the secular world, Ambassador Qin Dingkong immediately knew that the female soldier in front of him must be very, very young. Around the age of 20, she was already a young female soldier who could take charge of an area on her own. In his mind, Ambassador Qin Dingkong immediately flashed a sentence: "When the young are strong, the country will be strong." The country needed a group of strong young people to inject their strength into the motherland's big ship. Only then would the motherland be able to ride the wind and break the waves today and overcome all the seemingly insurmountable difficulties. It was their strength that became the greatest driving force to promote the motherland's strength. Ambassador Qin Dingkong, who smiled and nodded, took a deep look at the young female soldier again and did not stand and chat anymore. After 5 days and 4 nights of high-intensity combat, the young Special Forces soldiers were already very tired. They needed a good rest. Before resting, they also needed to have a comprehensive physical examination. The arranged vehicle was a mini minibus that could seat 18 people. Ambassador Qin Dingkong and the 3 staff members did not take any special vehicles. Instead, they took the mini minibus. After getting on the minibus, T6 and Sparrow Hawk sat at the back. When the minibus started, the 2 of them relaxed their bodies in the back. They were too tired and could finally have a good rest for a while. On the other hand, the Special Forces soldier who sat in front, especially the embassy staff, couldn't relax his body. He maintained a straight back and sat steadily. The other 3 embassy staff couldn't help but straighten their backs and sit up straight instead of leaning against each other. Ambassador Qin Dingkong smiled. He did not say that they could relax and rest. As a soldier, when they put on the military uniform, they had to act like a soldier. He reminded the determined young soldiers that they would not slack off. The car was not silent. Ambassador Qin Dingkong and Xia Jinyuan had been chatting. As a diplomat, he was very good at grasping the rhythm and scale of a conversation. Yi Jian, who was holding the fresh flowers in her hands, lowered her head and sniffed the fresh fragrance of the flowers. She maintained a slight smile on her face. It was really very fragrant. Xia Jinyuan and Ambassador Qin Dingkong sat in the front row while she sat with Li Jinyan. She lowered her head to sniff the flowers and smiled slightly. Li Jinyan couldn't help but chuckle and ask, "What's wrong?" "Yes, it smells good." She raised her head from the petals. The tip of her delicate nose was still stained with light yellow pollen. Her dark eyes looked at Li Jinyan with a smile. From her watery eyes, it could be seen that she liked the flowers in her hand very much. Li Jinyan saw her lowering her head to sniff the flowers again. Her behavior was childish, which he had never seen before. There was a deep smile in his cold eyes. "Why are you so happy?" A bouquet of flowers made her as happy as a child. Chapter 30:27. Of course she was happy. Yi Qian nodded vigorously. Her beautiful face was almost buried in the petals. She was afraid that Ambassador Qin Dingkong would hear her, so she said very softly, "I'm happy. This is the first time I've received flowers." How could she not be happy when she received flowers for the first time in 2 lifetimes? Even though, well, these flowers were not for her alone, she was still very happy. Her words made Li Jinyan speechless. There was a hint of surprise in his eyes. He reflexively raised his head and glanced at the head in the front row. His sister had been talking to him for so long, and he had never given her flowers, even once. He didn't know how to be romantic at all. Even he knew that he had to give flowers to a girl to express his love. "What flowers do you like? I'll give you a bouquet when we get back. I'll give it to you personally, and only you." Since Xia Jinyuan had never given flowers to his sister, he would do it as her brother. "This bouquet of flowers can't be considered as your personal bouquet," he added. Yi Qian pursed her lips and smiled. No need. I don't really like it either. I just think it's rare. Do you like the 100 contract roses? With some baby's breath, they'll be very beautiful." Li Jinyan was already discussing with Yi Qian what flowers to give. He had just said in his heart that Xia Jinyuan didn't know how to be romantic. In fact, he was the same as well. How could there be a surprise if they discussed it so directly? Yiqian was also a girl who didn't need to be romantic, especially when she heard her brother say, "I've never given flowers to anyone before." She immediately became interested. She immediately said with a smile, "Then, big brother, why don't you give them to me first? I'll give you another bouquet. I've never given flowers to anyone before either." Li Jinyan immediately nodded his head to express that this was a good idea. The two siblings agreed to give flowers to each other. In the front row, Xia Jinyuan was chatting with Ambassador Qin Dingkong. He didn't know that the two siblings sitting behind him had agreed to give flowers to each other. If he knew, he would be so angry that he would vomit blood. He was already one step behind when it came to sending the love letter. Now, he was even one step behind when it came to sending the flowers. Wouldn't that make him vomit blood? Li Jinyan, on the other hand, was in a good mood. When he checked his body, he found that his cold face had become much softer, which made the big mermaid and the big eel, who were most familiar with him, feel shocked. Their demon king was actually smiling at that nurse. F***CK, and with such a gentle smile. No. Don't tell me he fell in love with the blonde foreign nurse at first sight. The big mermaid was so shocked that she stuttered. This frightened the big eel even more. Don't talk nonsense. How could this be possible? It's forbidden. It's forbidden to have cross-border relationships. It's not like the Demon King doesn't know about it. He said again, "Damn, you're making me stutter. I don't want to stutter either, but this is too scary. Look, F***CK. He raised his head and smiled at the foreign nurse again. The big mermaid was so shocked that she held onto the door frame. Her eyes were so wide that they were about to pop out. Her face was full of shock. The big eel didn't dare to look anymore. He quickly turned around and moved away from the door, pressing his back against the wall. Impossible, don't think too much. The Qing Niao is much prettier than the foreign nurse, but the Demon King didn't fall in love with her. Previously, the commander wanted to marry them, but the Demon King rejected him. Impossible. How could the Demon King like a foreign nurse? He's so rational. How could it be love at first sight? Chapter 30:28. Love at first sight? Who is it? The door next door opened, and Xia Jinyuan walked out while buttoning his shirt. He happened to hear this and asked casually. Then the eel pulled his sleeves tightly and pulled him to the door. He whispered, "Captain Xia, look at Captain Li. What's different about him? Take a closer look." Xia Jinyuan was a little confused. Through the transparent glass on the door, he saw his future brother-in-law cooperating with the doctor under the guidance of a female nurse. There was nothing different. If there was a difference, there's a little difference. He nodded slightly, and his gaze fell on Li Jinyan's abdomen. He even had an 8-pack. When they trained together in the past, he didn't have an 8-pack. Yes, it's different. That's terrible. Captain Li finally fell in love with a woman, but it turned out to be a foreigner. How can it be a happy ending? He'll be scolded to death by the commander. Xia Jinyuan turned his head and frowned. He likes a woman? A foreigner? Who? What happened while I was in there? How did the devil fall in love with a foreign woman in the time it took him to do a checkup? The nurse. He smiled at the nurse as soon as he went in. His gaze was extraordinarily gentle. The eel was shocked, and her calves were still trembling. Xia Jinyuan glanced at the two of them, and then looked at Demon King Li, who was already putting on his clothes. He smiled gently and said, "Yes, that's possible. You can ask him when he comes out later." Their future brother-in-law fell in love with a foreign nurse. What were these two thinking? To show his support, Xia Jinyuan patted the eel and the eel's shoulders. Ask him properly. If you're single for too long, your personality will become more and more eccentric. Love at first sight is much better than not liking anyone at all. Your captain's happiness for the rest of his life depends on the two of you. The eel and the eel, who were entrusted with such an important task, suddenly felt a lot of pressure. Xia Jinyuan smiled and left. He didn't know how little Fox's checkup went. Her main problem was her knee. He had to ask the doctor to be at ease. Ambassador Qin Dingkong was already asking about the doctor, and he asked very carefully. The meniscus is not injured, but there is water in the knee. Although it is not serious, I suggest that you do a very small surgery, to remove the water. This was a Chinese doctor who could speak fluent Mandarin. They were also a private hospital, and the level of confidentiality was quite high. The embassy had specially chosen this hospital to examine the bodies of the Chinese special forces. This was also the arrangement that the military wanted. When he heard that there was water in the knees of the young female soldier, Ambassador Qin Dingkong frowned. Just now, when the hospital asked how old the female soldier was, he listened carefully. When he learned that she was only 20 years old, he sighed in his heart. The new generation excels the old. Now that he heard that there was water in the knees of the 20-year-old female soldier, he was worried about the health of the female soldier. Can you go back to China for surgery? What was the cause of the illness? How would it affect his life in the future? Was the surgery necessary? How big is the risk? No matter how small the surgery was, there was a certain amount of risk. Therefore, when Ambassador Qin Dingkong asked, he directly asked how big the risk was, not whether there was any risk. The Chinese doctor smiled and said, "Water in the knees is a common name. Our doctor's diagnosis is knee synovitis. It refers to the injury or rupture of the synovial membrane of the knee joint caused by acute trauma or chronic strain, resulting in blood or fluid accumulation in the knee joint. It is a non-infectious inflammation." Chapter 3029. Ambassador Qin Dingkong, who was gentle and refined in front of other countries, didn't quite understand the medical jargon, so he asked directly, "Tell me how to treat it. What else do we need to pay attention to in the later stages?" The Chinese doctor knew Ambassador Qin Dingkong in Estonia, so he explained respectfully, "The patient has acute traumatic synovitis. We can extract the fluid and blood through puncture treatment, then inject hyaluronic acid into the joint cavity. Next, the patient needs to rest in bed, raise the affected limb, and forbid weight-bearing. In the later stages, we need to strengthen the knee flexion and extension exercises. This is our hospital's current treatment for knee fluid, but there are conservative Chinese medicine treatments in China, and the results are also very good. The fluid in her knee is not obvious, so it's not a big problem. She can go back for surgery or conservative Chinese medicine treatment. As long as it's cured, it won't affect her life in the future. Then she could go back for treatment, but he still had to ask the female soldier's opinion and their captain's opinion. After all the examinations were completed, Ambassador Qin Dingkong already had the results of Yi Qian's physical examination. There were no major injuries, but countless minor injuries. Both knees were injured. There was fluid in the knee, damage to the calf ligaments, a large area of abrasions on the back, blisters on the soles of the feet, and signs of suppuration. Shoulder joint strain, ligament strain, elbow abrasions. In other words, there was no good part of the body. Ambassador Qin Dingkong sighed in his heart. Behind the personal medal was the glory of the motherland. It was the sacrifice of a soldier's blood and sweat. When Xia Jinyuan came over, Ambassador Qin Dingkong was talking to Yi Qian. "The surgery can be done in China or here. It's up to you." The word surgery pierced Xia Jinyuan's heart, and he walked over quickly. "Where does the surgery need to be?" he asked in a deep voice. Yi Qian turned his head and smiled at him. "Acute traumatic synovitis. It's just a small surgery. How much fluid is there in the knee?" Xia Jinyuan breathed a sigh of relief, and his voice was not as deep as before. "Although it's not a big problem, it's a small disease that can easily recur. It needs to be completely cured." Ambassador Qin Dingkong nodded in agreement. "Yes, it's not a big problem, but it needs to be treated completely. I'll treat it when I get back. I don't want to stay here." After all, Yi Qian had been in medical school before, so he knew more about it. The problem of fluid accumulation in the knees was not a serious one, but it was not a small one either. The fluid accumulation is not obvious. Let's observe it for 2 days and see. If it's obvious, we can extract it in time. That's what the doctor said too. The patient naturally listened to the doctor's arrangements. Since the doctor thought that he could return to China for treatment, that was the best. Xia Jinyuan took a closer look at Yi Qian's body. There were injuries here and there. There were 24 injuries all over Yi Qian's body. Seeing this, the corners of his mouth tightened. Do another health assessment after you return to China. You can only do general checkups for now. Ambassador Qin Dingkong saw that the young soldier was a little depressed and comforted him. The current inspection did not find any major problems. Don't worry. The elegant Ambassador Qin was in his early 50s. He was very gentlemanly, and because of his occupation, there was a hint of hidden sharpness in his elegant temperament. He spoke unhurriedly, but every word was heavy like the roots of a tree. It was an unshakable force. Listening to it made people feel at ease. Chapter 30:30. Xia Jinyuan was very respectful to this ambassador who had worked abroad for many years and had traveled through the flames of war several times to rescue the Chinese hostages who had been kidnapped by the rebels of other countries. Hearing this, he smiled and said, "Don't worry, these are all minor injuries. They'll all recover after 3 to 5 days of rest. You have to take good care of yourselves as well. Only with a healthy body can you continue to fight for the glory of the country. I will take a look at the health reports of the others. The country is still waiting for me to report on your health." Ambassador Qin Dingkong looked at Yi Qian again and said kindly, "Take good care of yourself. Although it's a small problem, it's still a problem. If it's a problem, it has to be dealt with. You can't ignore it. Once the problem becomes serious, it'll be too late to deal with it." Being in a foreign country and receiving the care of an elder made Yi Qian feel like a warm current had been injected into his heart. Looking at Ambassador Qin, who resembled Qin Xiu, Yi Qian, who had already guessed a possibility, nodded and thanked him. "Thank you for your concern. I'm sorry to have troubled you." Ambassador Qin Dingkong was very polite and well-mannered. When he left, there was a deep smile in his eyes. Her whole body was filled with pride, and her whole body was like a mountain. What a good Chinese female soldier. Next, it was time to treat the wounds on everyone's bodies. When a nurse used a pair of scissors to pick up cotton balls to wash the paint off the faces of the Chinese Special Forces soldiers, she was politely rejected. The paint was used to disguise everyone's appearance, so it naturally could not be washed clean. By the time the wounds on the 8 of them had been treated, it was already midnight when they came out. While they were treating their wounds, Ambassador Qin Dingkong called back to report the physical conditions of the 8 of them. There were no serious injuries. All of them were minor injuries that only required simple disinfection. According to the T6 combatant, he did not even want simple disinfection. He just wanted to collapse onto the bed and have a good sleep as soon as possible. Therefore, when the wounds were being cleaned, he almost fell asleep. They were staying in the staff dormitory of the embassy. Everyone had their own single room. It was clean, comfortable, and most importantly, safe. When the rest of the team members entered the dormitory, they did not even have the strength to take a shower. They took soap to wash their faces clean, wiped it a little, and fell asleep immediately. They really fell asleep on the ground and did not even touch the bed. Since she was too dirty, she turned on the heater in the room. She decided to sleep for a few hours to recover her energy before climbing into bed to sleep. Yi Qian really wanted to take a hot shower, but the wounds on her body had been disinfected, so she couldn't get wet for the time being. She could only resign herself to her fate and change into clean clothes, then wash her face before climbing into bed to sleep. They all fell asleep in less than 10 seconds. Xia Jinyuan and Li Jinyan didn't sleep. The two of them didn't care about the minor injuries on their bodies. They needed to avoid unboiled water for the time being. After taking a shower and washing their hair, they put on clean fitness shorts and were on the phone with Major General Yang. The two of them didn't go into too much detail over the phone. They only briefly mentioned the SFS Border Defense Force's malicious intent, which was enough for Major General Yang to understand. "All right, we'll talk about this when you return to China. Yi Qian's injuries will be treated in China. The military will arrange for a domestic specialist to re-diagnose her so that she won't have any sequelae. You guys should take care of her before she returns." Major General Yang said very seriously. At this time, it was time for the male soldiers to take good care of the female soldiers. It was only right to take care of one's girlfriend. It was also only right to take care of one's sister. After ending the call, the two of them looked at each other. Then, they smiled at the same time, and there was an indescribable flash of swords. Chapter 30-31. It was already 2:40 a.m. in Estonia and 6:40 a.m. in China. Yi Qian, who had fallen asleep the moment she hit the bed, did not know that Father Fu had called Commander-in-Chief Xia's private number because he could not find her at school. The two of them had exchanged numbers when they bumped into each other at the airport previously. Father Fu had never contacted Commander-in-Chief Xia, unless it was personal. This time, if not for the fact that his daughter, Yi Qian, was not on duty at school, and even her company commander did not know where she went, Father Fu would not have contacted Commander-in-Chief Xia. At 6:50 a.m., Commander-in-Chief Xia had already finished his breakfast and was reading the military times delivered by the guard. He did not even hear his private phone when it rang, and only realized that someone had called him when the guard reminded him. Commander-in-Chief Xia took out his phone and looked at it. He immediately put aside the newspaper in his hand and pressed the answer button. He laughed heartily and said, "Mr. Fu, this is rare. Isn't it rare?" In order to maintain the relationship between the two families, Commander-in-Chief Xia called his future in-laws on the fourth day. In the end, he received a prompt that said, "The number you have dialed has been turned off." He tried to call a few more times, but all he got was a cold, robotic female voice telling him that the phone was turned off. Only then did Commander-in-Chief Xia realize that it was extremely difficult to maintain the relationship between the two families. When he tried to contact them, he could not find them at all. Father Fu was in the field of scientific research, so his thoughts were not that complicated. He never thought too much about things or people. However, at this moment, Father Fu was really stunned. What does this Commander-in-Chief Xia sound like? He's been waiting for me to call. Why is he so enthusiastic? Father Fu felt a little strange in his heart, but he did not think too much about it. It was more important to find out about his daughter's whereabouts. He did not exchange any pleasantries and directly asked the Commander-in-Chief if he could contact Yi Qian's captain. He wanted to know if Yi Qian had gone to the army for training. Father Fu thought of the young captain in his daughter's army that even the school did not know about. Last night, Commander-in-Chief Xia knew that the Chinese team members had achieved good results in the IKA assault competition. 2 hours ago, he received a call from Major General Yang and learned that Yi Qian's 5-day and 4-night life and death competition had led to fluid accumulation in his knees. Fortunately, it was not obvious. He could observe it for 2 days to see if it would be absorbed by itself. If it was not, he would need to perform a minor surgery to remove the fluid. Now that Father Fu asked about it, Commander-in-Chief Xia couldn't tell him exactly what Yi Qian was doing. He just smiled and said, "Little Yi is indeed training with the team. I know that. I even saw her a while ago. She will arrive in the capital in the afternoon the day after tomorrow. After that, it will be rest time until school reopens." There were only a few days left before school reopened. The military academies reported in early. Over the past few days, there had been military academy students returning to school one after another. The first-year military academy students had even entered the end of their summer basic military training. Father Fu, who finally received news about his daughter, was very happy. Father and daughter had a special job and rarely contacted each other. Since they parted last time, they had not even called each other once. Now that they could meet each other in the capital, it was naturally for the best. With accurate news, Father Fu's heart flew back to the capital. After hanging up the phone, Father Fu immediately took a taxi to the airport and rushed back to the capital. Commander-in-Chief Xia pondered whether the two families should meet for dinner the night after tomorrow to chat with each other. At the same time, he could invite the elders from both sides to come out together. It would be good to have a big family chat. Chapter 30-32. Commander-in-Chief Xia decided to wait for the two of them to return to China before asking. If they could arrange for dinner together, it wouldn't be too late. But Xiao Ye's knees had accumulated water. After returning to China, she had to go to the military hospital for a detailed checkup. She was now a role model in the military, so there couldn't be any problems with her body. Yi Qian didn't know that her father had specifically called Commander-in-Chief Xia to find her. It was 7 o'clock in the morning in Estonia. Yi Qian, who rarely didn't follow her biological clock, opened her eyes. After sleeping for a few hours, she wasn't that tired mentally, but her body felt like it had been run over by a car. Her whole body was extremely sore. She only felt much better after taking a hot shower. Yi Qian didn't know if the other comrades had woken up yet. She put on the student uniform that she had kept in her backpack and sat in front of her desk to read a few books on Estonia's geography and customs. After reading a few pages, her empty stomach reminded her that she needed to eat. Yi Qian put down the books and tidied up her uniform before opening the door and coming out. The other team members hadn't woken up yet. Xia Jinyuan and Li Jinyan, who went to bed at around 4 o'clock in the morning, didn't wake up. The two of them were still sleeping soundly in bed. The staff of the embassy had already woken up. The guards in the embassy had also finished their morning exercise and were lining up to head to the cafeteria for breakfast. The working hours here were different from those in China. The official working hours were at 10 o'clock, but the staff of the embassy, including Ambassador Qin Dingkong, followed the working hours of the domestic government and went to work before 9 o'clock in the morning. Yi Qian, who lived on the second floor, went downstairs and asked the guards where the cafeteria was. The guards immediately told Yi Qian that she could eat with the guards who had finished their morning exercise. They also contacted their comrades through the walkie-talkie and asked them to wait for Yi Qian for a while. They were all soldiers, so they had a lot in common. After catching up with the guards, Yi Qian chatted with the 4 guards in a short while. The atmosphere was very harmonious, and there wasn't a trace of unfamiliarity or distance between them. I've been here for 2 years. I knew that there was an IKA assault competition. After learning about it, I found out that our Chinese side had never been invited. At that time, I was quite disappointed. A few days ago, when I found out that our Chinese side had been invited to participate in the competition, I was so happy that I couldn't sleep that night. Our class monitor told us last night that the special forces sent by our country had achieved good results. Our entire class was so happy that it was as if we had participated in the competition. I even saw our class monitor turn around and secretly wipe away his tears. A very young soldier, who had been working in the Chinese embassy in Estonia for 2 years, was talking to Yi Qian happily. From his expression, it could be seen that he was proud that the Chinese soldiers could participate in this IKA assault competition and obtain good results. Although they didn't participate in the competition, they felt a sense of pride and excitement when they saw their country's soldiers achieve good results for their country. When he mentioned it again, the soldiers' eyes were a little red. Another soldier said, "How can we not cry?" The last batch of veterans who went back said that the first batch of veterans who came to the local garrison were provoked by the local soldiers. When they returned home, they were still holding a breath in their hearts. That was a long, long time ago. It was when the embassy was established, and the first batch of soldiers who came with the embassy staff had some friction with the local soldiers. The reason was very simple. The local soldiers looked down on our Chinese soldiers and deliberately provoked them. Their words were disrespectful. Chapter 30-33. Since the two countries had just established diplomatic relations at that time, China chose to concede and not let the situation worsen. However, what happened that year left an unforgettable memory for the first batch of soldiers stationed there. Therefore, it was passed down by word of mouth, reminding every soldier from China to remember what happened that year and to use it as a warning to improve their own strength and not let others look down on them. This kind of thing happened not only in the Estonian embassy, but also in other Western countries. However, as China's position in the international arena became more stable, the provocation gradually weakened. Being weak did not mean that it did not exist. Only by remembering the past and constantly reminding oneself would one know how to forge ahead. Yi Qian in her previous life did not know about these things. Now that she heard it, her heart felt heavy, as if a stone was pressing down on it, making it difficult for her to breathe. Wasn't the SFS Border Defense Army the same? They provoked the Chinese soldiers everywhere, and their words were so unreasonable that it made people angry. Until the end, they did not apologize to the Chinese soldiers. They acted as if nothing had happened and casually erased their disrespect to the Chinese soldiers. It was indeed very angry to encounter such things, but such voices would become fewer and fewer until they completely disappeared. It will get better and better year by year. One day, those voices will disappear and they will shut up voluntarily. They will know what a laughable mistake they made. It will get better and better year by year. Yi Qian chatted with the young soldiers stationed here. This kind of conversation could only be understood and felt by them as soldiers. Her words touched the hearts of the soldiers. Even the smiles on their faces could not help but deepen. The cafeteria was right in front of them. After the 12 soldiers had breakfast at the designated time, they immediately had to change shifts and replace their comrades to eat breakfast. They ate very quickly, but the sound of spoons colliding with plates was very, very soft. Occasionally, there would be sounds of conversation, but it was limited to work. Yi Qian sat in the middle of them and did not feel out of place at all. When Ambassador Qin Dingkong walked in, he saw an unfamiliar female soldier chatting with a young armed police officer stationed at the embassy. He was stunned for a moment, then quickly realized who the unfamiliar female soldier was. He did not know her name. At this moment, Ambassador Qin Dingkong finally saw the female soldier's face clearly. After pausing for a few seconds, he turned his head and looked at the young diplomat who was on a business trip to Estonia 3 days ago. He could not help but have a meaningful look in his eyes. "You eat first. I will go over there and say hello." Ambassador Qin Dingkong whispered to the young diplomat next to him, indicating that he should eat first. At first, the young diplomat who came to Estonia on a business trip did not pay attention to the guards eating. Ambassador Qin Dingkong heard the young diplomat, who was his son, Qin Dingkong, say the name of the female soldier, and with disbelief, "Of the... You know her." Ambassador Qin Dingkong was also surprised. His son actually knew the young female soldier. Qin Xiu replied with a hum. He could not control his feet and walked towards Yi Qian, who was eating a white steamed bun. He had not seen her for a long time, nor had he heard any news about her. But miraculously, he met her here. He could not help but think of a word: fate. Chapter 30-34. They were separated by thousands of mountains and rivers, yet they accidentally met in a foreign country. Wasn't this fate? We really do know each other. How do you know each other? Ambassador Qin Dingkong, who was asking the question, saw his son walking straight over and hurriedly stopped him. "Wait, you can eat at the side. I'll go over and say hello." How they knew each other was a long story. Qin Xiu's elegant and handsome face had a deep smile. He stared deeply at Yi Qian and waited patiently. Yi Qian hadn't noticed Qin Xiu yet, but when he saw Ambassador Qin Dingkong, who was in his early 50s, walking over, Yi Qian immediately put down the steamed bun in his hand and stood up. Ambassador Qin Dingkong was already smiling brightly. He took the initiative to greet Yi Qian, "Good morning." This made Yi Qian feel that he had been rude. He bowed slightly to express his apology and politely greeted him at the same time. When Qin Xiu, who was sitting at the side, saw this, the smile in his eyes completely spread. He looked even more handsome and had a kind of radiance that attracted everyone's attention. Soon, his gaze met Yi Qian's gaze. Qin Xiu raised his hand elegantly and greeted Yi Qian from 2 to 3 meters away. He saw a flash of surprise on Yi Qian's face, and the smile on his thin lips deepened. Like him, she was extremely surprised to see the other party. When she saw Ambassador Qin Dingkong last night, Yi Qian vaguely guessed the relationship between Qin Xiu and him. In the end, she saw Qin Xiu appear in front of her early in the morning. Even though Yi Qian was usually calm, she couldn't help but be surprised. Ambassador Qin Dingkong took in all of her expressions, and he knew that she really knew his son. "I really didn't expect to meet you here. After we met last time, I planned to look for you. In the end, due to various reasons related to work, I put it on hold. I'm really surprised to see you in a foreign country." Yi Qian had already sat down beside Qin Xiao. Opposite them was Ambassador Qin Dingkong, who was watching them talk with a smile. Hearing this, Ambassador Qin Dingkong's eyes narrowed slightly, and he glanced at his son without leaving a trace. Today, Qin Xiao was a little talkative, and it was obvious that he was happy. Needless to say, the look in his eyes was so gentle that it surprised him as a father. He knew his son too well. He looked gentle and polite, but in reality, he was extremely cold and arrogant. This kind of gentle gaze, even he, as a father, had never enjoyed it. Today, however, he was shocked to see him show such a gentle gaze to a young female soldier. Qin Xiao, who had never been attracted to a girl, seemed to be interested in the female soldier in front of him. No, not only was he interested in her, but he was very interested in her. Yi Qian pursed his lips and smiled. I didn't expect it either, but when I saw Mr. Ambassador last night, I vaguely guessed your relationship with Mr. Ambassador. I didn't expect to see you so early in the morning. Isn't it fate? Qin Xiao asked her gently. Especially at the end of his sentence, the tenderness in his voice had already changed 1,000 times, and the meaning could not be more obvious. Unfortunately, Yi Qian was a female soldier who didn't think in this direction. She didn't hear anything special. In addition, Qin Xiao had always spoken in such a gentle tone, so she didn't think much of it. But she knew that the word fate couldn't be easily recognized. She changed her words and said with a smile, "It's amazing, but it doesn't seem so amazing when you think about it. You're a diplomat, so it's normal to meet in the embassy." Chapter 30-35. Qin Xiao smiled. The Yi Qian he knew had always been so pure that every time he interacted with her, his fondness for her deepened. He liked her purity very much. She was not pretentious, nor did she belittle herself. She had always maintained her character. She was so pure. Well, you're right. It's normal to run into me in the embassy. She didn't talk about fate, so he didn't talk about it either. He knew that she was a female soldier who paid attention to the distance between men and women. Such an answer also made Ambassador Qin Dingkong's impression of Yi Qian even better, especially when he saw that she knew that he was Qin Xiao's father. Her eyes were so natural and calm that there was no change in them. From last night's brief exchange to today's meeting, they didn't even know each other. Ambassador Qin Dingkong, who had always been strict with others and himself, already had a very high opinion of Yi Qian in his heart. Therefore, when he sensed his son's thoughts, he didn't stop him. Instead, he took it calmly. Now, it was obvious that Qin Xiao was only interested in the female soldier who spoke to him. She didn't have any interest in Qin Xiao himself or Qin Xiao's family. She didn't have any interest in him at all. He didn't need to say anything at all. He just watched quietly. Qin Xiao didn't ask why Yi Qian was here. He understood. Therefore, when he saw that Yi Qian only ate steamed buns, he put his bowl of millet porridge on Yi Qian's stainless steel plate. You should eat some porridge that's easy to digest. You shouldn't eat too much steamed buns for the time being. He was very attentive and caring. Yi Qian, who was a little hungry, saw this and put the steamed bun aside. She said, "Thank you," and took a small sip of the golden millet porridge. She and Qin Xiao had known each other for a long time, so there was no sense of distance when they spoke. In addition, they had fought side by side in the neighboring country, so they got along much more casually. They got along very comfortably and didn't need to pay too much attention. Ambassador Qin Dingkong scooped the millet porridge unhurriedly. When Qin Xiao looked over, he returned a meaningful smile, which made Qin Xiao feel a little embarrassed. He had forgotten that his father was standing right beside him. Ambassador Qin Dingkong was already used to his son's forgetfulness in certain aspects. Colonel Xia, who had just woken up, opened his eyes, his eyelids twitching nonstop. After looking at the time, he rolled out of bed. From washing up to getting dressed, he had used 3 minutes. He knew which room Yi Qian lived in. After knocking 3 times, he pushed open the door and entered. It was a single room. Opening the door, he could see the furnishings inside. His gaze fell on the neatly folded quilt. Commander Xia narrowed his eyes and turned to go downstairs. His eyelids were still twitching. He raised his hand several times, but it was still the same. After asking where the cafeteria was, Colonel Xia strode forward quickly. His little fox woke up half an hour earlier than him and went to the cafeteria to eat, but he didn't accompany her. By the time he got there, the little fox should have already finished her breakfast and was preparing to go back to sleep. The cafeteria was not far from the dormitory. The dormitory was at the back, separated by a small field and a row of green belts. In front of the cafeteria was a two-story European-style building. After passing through the field and going around the green belt, Colonel Xia's vision became a little dim. There was nothing else. He saw his love rival talking with his girlfriend. He didn't know what they were talking about, but there was a deep smile on his love rival's face. When he lowered his head, the gentleness on his face made him want to rush up and cover it with mud. What a guy. He even bumped into him here. Chapter 30-36. Yi Qian, who was talking to Qin Xiu, hadn't seen him yet. There were trees and greenery on both sides, and his line of sight was obstructed. He didn't immediately notice the man whose heart was bubbling with jealousy. You can't say that it's hard. Because I like it, I don't think it's hard. I can't say that I'm tired. When I'm tired, I sleep for a while, rest for a while, and think about the goals I haven't achieved yet. I think about why I came here, and then I don't feel tired. Qin Xiu asked Yi Qian if the competition this time was very hard and tiring. Yi Qian thought about it for a while, then answered honestly. If it were someone else, she would have smiled and changed the topic. But Qin Xiu was different. She had seen his iron-blooded demeanor when he was diplomatic with other countries. In the face of armed foreign soldiers, he stood up for the interests of the country without fear. She had also seen his fearlessness and calmness in the face of a hail of bullets. Yi Qian admired Qin Xiu from the bottom of her heart. She only admired him, not worshipped him. The only person she worshipped was the man in her heart, Lieutenant Colonel Xia. Qin Xiu could naturally hear Yi Qian's respect for him. It was a kind of respectful respect. This kind of respect was not what he wanted. It was too distant, and he didn't like it. After listening quietly, his footsteps suddenly came to a halt. Yi Qian didn't understand. He thought that Qin Xiu had stopped because of something, so he stopped as well. He looked up at the slender young diplomat with wide shoulders and a narrow waist. Today, he wore a solid navy blue suit with a white shirt inside. He wore a slanted bow tie that was the same color as the suit. The slanted tie embellished the sedate color of the suit, and it didn't make him look old at all. Instead, it made him look even more elegant and handsome. There was no sun in the sky. It was gloomy and dark, as if dark clouds were pressing down. Standing under the tree, Qin Xiu narrowed his eyes. When he fixed his gaze on Yi Qian, his hidden joy was faintly discernible. The surroundings were too quiet, and the time was too good. Everything was so natural. The joy that had never been expressed in words was like a clear spring that had finally turned into a trickle, slowly seeping out of the soil. In an instant, her heart was filled with tenderness, and there was also the sweetness of anticipating love's care. Qin Xiu wanted to confess his love to her. After careful consideration for such a long time and repeated questions about his feelings, he finally told himself with certainty, Qin Xiu, you like the girl in front of you. You don't like her for fun, nor do you like her for a moment of novelty. You really like the girl in front of you who is pure and works hard on her own ability. It wasn't just pure liking. It was a deeper and more intense form of love. Qin Xiu, you've fallen in love with the girl in front of you who is like the morning sun. At that moment, Qin Xiu knew that he had to seize the opportunity to confess his love. Fate came quietly, and they inadvertently met again. The goddess of luck held Cupid's hand, and together they descended to his side. He had to seize the opportunity to confess his love, so that he wouldn't let down the fate that brought them together. Xia Jinyuan, who was striding over, was like a lion whose territory had been invaded. He didn't take a detour with a cold look on his face. When he realized that something was wrong, he walked like a gust of wind. He almost trotted. Then he lifted his long legs and walked straight through the half-knee-high bushes in the green belt. He took the shortest path and rushed over. How could he walk properly when he was trying to steal Yi Qian's girl right under his nose? Of course not. He had to take the shortest path. In order to drive away his love rival, Xia Jinyuan was bound to come in a storm. Chapter 30-37. Crossing the field and crossing the half-knee-high bushes, Colonel Xia's face wasn't red, and he wasn't out of breath, but his heart was filled with jealousy. He finally shortened the distance between himself and Yi Qian to only 10 meters. This was the shortest path, and there were no other shortcuts to take. Because Qin Xiu suddenly stopped, Yi Qian turned sideways and looked at him in confusion. As a result, she didn't notice the jealous young colonel behind her. In Qin Xiu's eyes, there was only Yi Qian in the whole world, and he was thinking about how to confess. He automatically blocked out everything around him except for Yi Qian, so he didn't see Colonel Xia. What's wrong? Do you have something to do? Then go ahead. I won't delay your business, you. He didn't say anything for a long time. Yi Qian thought he had something to do, but before he could finish speaking, Yi Qian, who had been looking up at him, suddenly felt her heart tighten. She was shocked by the darkness in his eyes. Suddenly, she had an epiphany. But before that thought could settle in her heart, it was immediately slapped out of her mind by a slap from the depths of her soul. Don't stay in your heart. Hurry up and slap it out. Qin Xiu was an outstanding diplomat, and observing people's body language was one of his compulsory courses. Yi Qian's change in expression didn't escape his eyes. He knew in his heart that this intelligent girl in front of him saw something unusual in his eyes. Yi Qian, what you saw in my eyes just now was me. Didn't we agree to meet in your room at 8 o'clock? Have you lost track of time? Behind him, a clear voice calmly interrupted Qin Xiu's next words. I waited in your room for a few minutes, and I even packed your luggage, but you still haven't come back. After saying a long string of words, he didn't give Qin Xiu a chance to speak again. He already knew what his love rival was going to say. How could he give his love rival a chance to speak again? Hearing the familiar voice, Yi Qian immediately breathed a sigh of relief. She had also vaguely guessed what Qin Xiu might say. It was too unbelievable. Thinking too much, definitely thinking too much. How could this be? Yi Qian felt that he might have been overthinking things. No matter how he thought about it, it was impossible. Qin Xiu, a diplomat, young, promising, and elegant like a noble son. Fortunately, she had thought of a possibility in time and sent it flying. Otherwise, she would have made a fool of herself. Yi Qian smiled apologetically at him and turned around. He naturally continued the conversation with the sour lieutenant colonel. I remember. I bumped into Qin Xiu in the cafeteria just now. We haven't seen each other for a long time, so we chatted for a while. Unlike you, we see each other every day. I can find you whenever I want to chat. There was no need for too many words. One had not seen each other for a long time, while the others saw each other every day. The sour lieutenant colonel, who was secretly rubbing his hands together, instantly felt better. He no longer had the thought of covering his love rival's face with dirt. He walked closer to Yi Qian. The distance between them wasn't about an arm's length, but rather, he stood shoulder to shoulder with Yi Qian. The distance between them was so close that Yi Qian only needed to tilt his head, and his head could rest on his shoulder. This was the intimate distance between lovers. Qin Xiu's heart sank when he interrupted Yi Qian's confession. When he saw the close distance between the two of them, the corners of his mouth curved into an unchanging smile. It was as if he didn't understand the relationship between the two of them. However, the pair of eyes that gazed gently at Yi Qian were deep and serene, like a dark whirlpool in the depths of the sea. Chapter 30-38. Counselor Qin, long time no see. Xia Jinyuan stretched out his hand gracefully and smiled. I didn't expect to meet you here, Counselor Qin. What a pleasant surprise. You almost confessed to me as your girlfriend. The elegant lieutenant, Colonel Xia's mind was filled with thoughts. Counselors were diplomats with a position lower than ambassadors in the embassy. Counselors were divided into minister counselor, political counselor, commercial counselor, economic counselor, cultural counselor, and education counselor. Qin Xiu's minister counselor was higher than ordinary counselors. Xia Jinyuan did not address Qin Xiu as Ambassador Qin, like his other comrades. Ambassador was the highest position in the embassy. Qin Xiu was the youngest diplomat, but he had not become an ambassador like his father. Ever since he found out that Qin Xiu was a powerful rival in love, Lieutenant Colonel Xia had to secretly investigate. Although he and Qin Xiu were the same age and were both from Beijing, their paths were completely different. When he was young, he walked the path of arrogance. When Qin Xiu was young, he walked the path of a good student. Although there was a period of time when Qin Xiu played with flying cars, it was only during the rebellious period of youth. The rest of the time, he was still a good student. Arrogant students and good students did not get along well. Since they were both from Beijing, it was normal for them not to be friends. After his private investigation, Lieutenant Colonel Xia could not help but inwardly gasp. No wonder he could become the youngest diplomat. He was knowledgeable, courageous, and intelligent. In addition, he had a passable appearance and came from a diplomatic family. He was simply the best son-in-law in the hearts of the noble women. Such a powerful rival in love must be taken seriously and resolutely on defense, not giving the enemy any chance to invade. Lieutenant Colonel Xia had already activated his rival in love mode. As for Qin Xiu, he had also entered battle mode. Last time, he was not wrong. The girl he fell in love with had an unusual relationship with this young man from the family Xia. He reached out and gracefully shook hands with him. He smiled and said, "Hello, Captain Xia. I did not expect to meet you here. It is indeed a pleasant surprise." He was so surprised that he wanted to directly pull Yi Qian to another place to confess. He had miscalculated. Previously, when he accidentally bumped into Yi Qian at the military headquarters and saw him together with old Master Fu's grandson, Li Jinyan, he should have thought that since Yi Qian was participating in the Ika assault, Xia Jinyuan and Li Jinyan were likely to be there too. She was so immersed in the surprise of meeting Yi Qian that she forgot to think. If he took a wrong step, it would cause his confession to fail. Qin Xiu's eyes flashed with a trace of imperceptible annoyance. It was no longer the right time to confess to Yi Qian, nor was it the right time to continue chatting with her. He didn't want to know the relationship between her and Xia Jinyuan. In order to avoid making Yi Qian feel awkward the next time they met, he had no choice but to leave. "Yi Qian, I have something to take care of here. Let's talk another day." In order to be able to see each other well in the future, Qin Xiu made a prompt decision and no longer hesitated. At the same time, he took out a pen from his pocket and took out a sticky note to write down his domestic phone number. "We're so familiar with each other, but we don't have each other's phone numbers. It's a little unreasonable." He wrote a string of numbers on the sticky note and handed it to Yi Qian. There was a hint of persistence in his smiling eyes. "I hope to receive your message when I return to China." He had already begun his attack. Qin Xiu instantly understood that love was the same as negotiation. There was no hesitation. Once he understood what he wanted, he had to attack immediately. He could not hesitate. The opportunity had passed. He could only wait for the next opportunity. Chapter 3039. Xia Jinyuan's smiling gaze slowly slid down from his love rival's face, then landed on the note. When he slowly raised his head again, the smile in his eyes faded a lot. There was indeed a sense of crisis. Despite knowing that his relationship with Yi Qian was not simple, he could still attack him. It was clear that this Counselor Qin was not as gentle and refined as he appeared to be. As a diplomat who was constantly involved in meetings with other countries and fought for his country, how could he possibly be as gentle and refined as he appeared to be? Being gentle and refined was his temperament. He appeared to be easy to talk to, but in reality, he was strong and would not be easily defeated. Yi Qian took the note. She did not say that she would send a text message. Instead, she smiled and said, "I rarely use my phone in school, and the school does not allow me to use my phone. If I can't send you a text message in time, please forgive me." If Qin Xiu was really like what she thought just now, then she definitely had to avoid arousing suspicion. She did not want her relationship with a man to be too complicated. She had Captain Xia, a man who loved her and she loved him. No matter how good the man outside was, he was not the Captain Xia in her heart. Xia Jinyuan's slightly cold black eyes smiled faintly as he looked at Qin Xiu. Then, he slowly said, "Excuse me, Counselor Qin. Yi Qian and I have some matters to attend to. Goodbye." "Goodbye, Captain Xia." Qin Xiu was not rude. He controlled his emotions very well and said politely to Yi Qian, "Goodbye, Yi Qian." There would be a time when they would meet again, and he would take his time. He would not stop and would take his leave first. From this, it could be seen that the youngest diplomat, Qin Xiu, possessed extraordinary courage. He was decisive and did not hesitate, which was very suitable for his identity as a diplomat. Looking at his back as he left, Xia Jinyuan, whose thin lips had been holding a smile, had a cold look in his eyes. Just now Qin Xiu and Yi Qian had already realized that something was amiss. She instinctively wanted to explain to Xia Jinyuan, but in exchange, Xia Jinyuan smiled gently and dotingly. It is indeed a joyous thing to meet a friend in a foreign land. He raised his hand and rubbed her head. The gentleness in his eyes was as sweet as honey. "I want to go for breakfast. Accompany me?" There was no need to explain. She did not do anything wrong, and she was very considerate of his feelings. She used her actions and words to tell Qin Xiu what her relationship with him. A little fox like her who knew how to dote on others. He would be the one to take care of her, pamper her, and love her. No one else would be able to squeeze in even half a millimeter. Yi Qian's bright eyes sparkled as if they were sprinkled with fine diamonds. His beautiful face suddenly bloomed with a smile. It was as clear as crystal, so clear that the whole sky could not be compared to the light smile of the person in front of him. "Okay, I'll go with you." Xia Jinyuan, whose heart was suddenly stirred, could not help but gently clench his fists. His cold gaze swept around. There were 2 cameras in front of him on the left, one on the right, and another hidden camera in the corner of the eaves. There was even a hidden camera embedded in the lamppost. He turned around and scanned his surroundings like an X-ray. Soon, he found a total of 6 cameras nearby. There was only one place that was convenient for him to do something bad. "Yi Qian, come over here and take a look. Our embassy's office building is built in a Gothic style. Since you can't go out for a walk, you can walk around the embassy and experience the difference in a foreign land." Colonel Xia, who had found a good place, naturally looked around. After confirming that there were no staff members of the embassy, he walked over first. At the same time, he found an excuse to coax Yi Qian over. Chapter 3040. Yi Qian did not understand Xia Jinyuan's intentions. Hearing this, she really admired the architectural style of the embassy. She looked up and followed Xia Jinyuan's footsteps. The Chinese embassy in Estonia was built in the Gothic style. Its main features were pointed arches, ribbed vaults, and flying arches. It had a completely different atmosphere from the ancient Chinese buildings. Xia Jinyuan stood under the flying arches. His eyes gradually changed color as he stared at Yi Qian, who was completely unguarded against him and really enjoying the scenery of the embassy. Her unguarded attitude towards him made his breath catch in his throat. He stood there and waited for the girl he loved the most to walk to his side. Yi Qian observed carefully. The architecture of the embassy was very beautiful, but no matter how beautiful it was, it could not compare to the man beside her. After a few glances, she saw him standing under the flying arches and gazing at her with a gentle smile. Yi Qian blushed and hurriedly walked over. "Stop looking. Hurry up and eat breakfast. There's millet porridge. It's good for the stomach. It's suitable for people like us who haven't eaten properly for a few days. Come to my side." Xia Jinyuan did not move. He reached out his hand to the girl who was standing 3 steps away from him. His gentle gaze turned into water and enveloped Yi Qian. "Come on my side. Look at me. Come on my side. Look at me." Yi Qian's face, which was already a little hot, suddenly turned red. Even her jade-like ears turned red. "Come here," he said softly again. His gaze was even gentler. Yi Qian, whose cheeks were as delicate as pink flower petals, muttered softly, "You look at me every day. What's there to look at? You might as well go eat breakfast earlier." They were only 3 steps away. Yi Qian moved over. Before she could get close, he suddenly grabbed her wrist and pulled her into his arms forcefully. Yi Qian was completely unprepared for Xia Jinyuan's sudden strength. Her whole body crashed into his arms. Before the small cry of surprise could come out of her mouth, it was stopped by his kiss just as it reached her throat. Yi Qian was stunned for a moment. When he came back to his senses, he panicked. This was not a place for 2 people to be intimate with each other. How could he be so daring? She almost fainted from his impudence. "Ugh, let go, let go." With his lips sealed, Yi Qian, who was extremely nervous, could only mumble incoherently in his throat. He could not speak clearly and could only make muffled sounds. Her mouth was filled with his scent. It was refreshing and clean, but it was also extremely strong. It was like highly concentrated alcohol, causing her to feel dizzy and weak in the knees. Her entire body felt dizzy as she lay softly in his arms, unable to exert any strength. I'll be seen. Ugh, let me go, Captain Xia." Even though her limbs were weak, she could not suppress the nervousness in her heart. Yi Qian was really afraid that someone would come over and see the 2 of them hiding here and whispering sweet nothings to each other. She struggled a little fiercely. After eating breakfast, she regained her strength and exerted so much strength that Xia Jinyuan almost lost his grip on her. He released her lips from his tight kiss and placed his thin lips next to her ear. "Don't move. I've observed just now. There's no one around, and there aren't any spies either. It's very safe. But if you move again, you might be seen by the spies. Be good, don't move." His hot breath sprayed to the side of her ear. It was so hot that Yi Qian's neck turned red. "This is not." "Ugh." Before she could finish her sentence, her earlobe was sucked into his mouth. His teeth were even gently biting it. Her unfinished words turned into soft moans that were as soft as water. They were sweet and alluring, and when they entered his ears, they became decadent sounds. Chapter 3041. Don't move. If you move, we'll be seen. Her deep moans entered his ears and became the most seductive sound. In an instant, Xia Jinyuan's breathing became heavier and hotter. Yi Qian's heart tightened. This guy, when he said he wanted her to come over to look at the scenery, he clearly had the idea of kissing her. She actually didn't realize it. She really thought he wanted her to admire the scenery of the embassy building. Step by step, she fell into his gentle trap. How could he be so evil? Afraid of being discovered, the shy Yi Qian didn't dare to move. He nibbled on her earlobe and sucked on her sensitive neck. As if an electric current had passed through her, Yi Qian's eyes were filled with a thin layer of mist. Her dark eyes were moist and watery, like black pearls that had been washed by water, bright and resplendent. "Don't do it here, Captain Xia. We'll be discovered. Let go." She didn't even dare to speak loudly. Her voice was as soft as a kitten's. The more nervous she was, the more afraid she was to speak loudly. The more afraid she was to speak loudly, the softer her voice became. This tormented Xia Jinyuan to the point where he would get burned if he played with fire. Feeling extremely uncomfortable, he suddenly pressed Yi Qian against the wall. Then he squeezed his body to the side and moved his feet to squeeze her inside. With his back facing the outside, he completely wrapped her in his arms and wrapped her tightly. "I can't see. You're in my arms now. I'll block you. Don't wrap your hand around my neck. If you don't have the strength, grab my collar. Be good, don't open your legs, close them, don't reach them out. I'll block you. Don't be afraid." His hot, thin lips kissed her neck, from her earlobe to her chin. His forceful sucking made Yi Qian, whose face was burning red, have no choice but to raise her head and neck. Her neck, which was the most vulnerable and fatal part, was completely exposed. His hot, thin lips kissed her nonstop. When she heard what he said, Yi Qian was so anxious that her eyes started to water. Captain Xia, don't do it here. Let's go back to the dormitory. Let's go back to the dormitory. Her hands did not grab his collar, but pressed against his firm chest, not allowing him to get any closer. The space under the flying arch was too small. It was so small that the two of them just happened to be face to face. Any more, and they would be swept by the spies outside. Yi Qian didn't even dare to push him. He was afraid that if he moved too abruptly, it would backfire. She was scared, but Xia Jinyuan's body was tense. He couldn't stop kissing her passionately, but her soft pleading made his heart melt. No matter how tense his body was, he had to endure it. Let me catch my breath. As expected, he stopped kissing and buried his head in Yi Qian's neck, gasping for air. Inside his body, a fire was burning fiercely. It was burning so fiercely that his body was about to explode. When Yi Qian saw that he had stopped, her weak legs finally regained some strength. Are you done? Stop panting. The guards on shift will pass by here to eat in the cafeteria. You can catch your breath as you walk. Afraid that he would kiss her again, Yi Qian spoke softly. She didn't understand what he meant by catching his breath. Xia Jinyuan couldn't help but laugh. Then, his tall and slender body pressed on top of hers. He smiled mischievously. We haven't caught our breath yet. How can we catch our breath as we walk? We'll be laughed at. He purposely pressed down on Yi Qian's crotch so that she could clearly feel where he needed to catch his breath. Chapter 3042. Yi Qian's cultivation level was not as high as Lieutenant Colonel Xia's, who grew up in the Imperial City. She thought he was trying to push the blame onto her by saying something like, "Who's panting while walking? People will laugh at you." She had never seen anyone panting while walking and being laughed at. It couldn't be that he couldn't even catch his breath just because he was a soldier, right? Are you still trying to push the blame onto me? Captain Xia, if you continue to push the blame onto me, I'm really going to get angry. Yi Qian tried her best to press herself against the wall. In order not to let the people outside see what they were doing, the closer she pressed herself against the wall, the tighter Xia Jinyuan pressed himself against her. Panting isn't just limited to your mouth. There are other places where you need to catch your breath. If you're panting here, you have to hide it. Xia Jinyuan buried his head in Yi Qian's neck and chuckled. If you don't hide it properly, people will laugh at you. Lieutenant Colonel Xia was mischievous when he was resting. In order to let Yi Qian know where he needed to catch his breath, he purposely pressed down on Yi Qian's crotch so that she could clearly feel where he needed to catch his breath. When he leaned closer, Yi Qian understood. How could she not understand? She could feel the panic in her heart. Her face started to burn uncontrollably again. Her originally weak body suddenly stiffened, and she didn't know where to put her hands and feet. So, he really couldn't go out to catch his breath. He really had to hide it. Yi Qian stopped talking. She knew that if she continued to argue, she wouldn't be able to win against him. She might as well remain silent and let him, cough. Let him catch his breath first. His tall body pressed down on Yi Qian. His breath surrounded Yi Qian. He just leaned against her lazily. His handsome nose pressed against the skin of her neck. His breathing was still heavy and rapid. It didn't look like he was going to calm down anytime soon. Yi Qian tried her best to stand up straight. The back of her hands pressed against the cold wall. She tried her best to shrink the space between them and minimize the chance of being exposed. Neither of them spoke. They just stood there quietly. It was as if the entire world had quieted down. Her heart pounded. It was a little chaotic, but it was also a little sweet. She felt sweet because of the short time they spent hugging each other. Time seemed to have slowed down because of the two of them. Yi Qian closed his eyes, lowered his head, and quietly buried his head in the hollow of his neck. The two of them were like a pair of mandarin ducks, snuggled up to each other, waiting for each other. Xia Jinyuan did not linger any longer. When he finally calmed down the restlessness in his body, he lifted his head from her neck and stretched his large body to block Yi Qian's line of sight. Just now, I really just wanted to kiss you, like this. Xia Jinyuan suddenly lowered his head and planted a light kiss on Yi Qian's red lips. Like this, but I underestimated your seduction. I was a little careless and lost control. Yi Qian could no longer feel the pain in her crotch. She knew that he had calmed down. Just as she let out a sigh of relief, he suddenly kissed her again. Yi Qian's heart skipped a beat. She was afraid that he would relapse and do something that scared her again. In a moment of desperation, she raised her hand and covered his mouth tightly. She said anxiously, "I'm done watching. If you don't go eat breakfast, I won't accompany you anymore." Chapter 3043. Her nervousness made the smile on Xia Jinyuan's handsome face deepen. His eyes were full of smiles. His thin lips were still curled up, and he gently brushed Yi Jian's palm. His arm directly wrapped around her slender waist, and he did not let her shrink back anymore. Instead, he completely leaned into his embrace. "Why are you so timid? Even if you really see it, it's no big deal. I'm here." If they really saw it, with Little Fox's current capabilities and military achievements, who would say their relationship would delay her studies? The school wouldn't say much, but it was still possible for them to talk to her. Moreover, the mastermind had yet to surface. Even though he wasn't afraid, he still had to be careful of her. He lowered his head and kissed her forehead before letting go. "My flight is at 2 in the afternoon. I'll go to your room later. I'll have breakfast first. You can go back to the dormitory and rest." Yi Jian didn't want to accompany him to eat anymore, so she nodded. Seeing him walk out of the flying arch, she quickly adjusted her collar and moved sideways, leaving from the other side of the flying arch as if she was deceiving herself. She saw Xia Jinyuan standing there and chuckled. Why was he so cute? She was so scared, but she couldn't bear to push him away. His little fox was really a soft-hearted little fox. Yes, she was only soft-hearted towards him. Towards others, such as Qin Xiu, she didn't even want to give him her personal number. Although Little Fox was slow when it came to love, she was smart. Qin Xiu's behavior just now obviously made her feel something, but she must have thought that she was overthinking. That was why she said those words when she took Qin Xiu's personal number. She didn't reject him, but she also told Qin Xiu that he was just a normal friend to her. She might forget about him when she was busy. Through the way she handled this matter, it wasn't hard to see that although Little Fox was soft-hearted, she was also very hard-hearted. She was very cold towards people she didn't miss and things she didn't miss. When Counselor Qin left, his eyes didn't have a faint smile like Xia Jinyuan's. He seemed a little gloomy, but he liked it. Colonel Xia, whose heart was no longer sour, walked briskly to the cafeteria to eat. On the other hand, Qin Xiu, who had left, was not so relaxed. The fate he thought was so fragile that before he could express his feelings, he was already rejected by the girl he fell in love with without hesitation. She rejected him in a way that protected his dignity. Ambassador Qin Dingkong pushed open the door of his office and saw his son standing in front of the window with his hands in his trouser pockets. He stood still as if he was thinking about something. When he closed the door, he deliberately made some noise. Qin Xiu, who was standing there thinking, turned around and said, "Dad, the documents are on your desk. Take a look. I've also translated the information for the meeting, and I need your approval." Qin Xiu naturally took out his hands from his trouser pockets and turned around. He didn't look as cold as before. Instead, he had a temperament that was very similar to Ambassador Qin Dingkong's, which was gentle and elegant with a little fierceness. "All right, take a seat first. I'll see if there's any problem." Ambassador Qin Dingkong went around the desk and sat down. He opened the documents and looked at the documents that he needed to approve with a serious expression. After he finished reviewing, Qin Xiu immediately stood up and waited for instructions. He didn't let his personal affairs affect his work. After he finished reviewing and signing the documents, he handed them back to Qin Xiu. Ambassador Qin Dingkong didn't let his son leave immediately. Instead, he pointed to the chair in front of his desk and said with a smile, "You'll be back the day after tomorrow. You'll be busy starting from 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Since you have time now, let's talk." Chapter 3044. Qin Dingkong and Qin Xiu were the kind of father and son who rarely saw each other throughout the year. It had been nearly a year and a half since the last time they met. They were both diplomatic staff and loved their jobs. Both father and son were the same kind of people. They put all their focus on their work and didn't care much about their families. Therefore, it was no wonder that Mrs. Qin was anxious to arrange a blind date for Qin Xiu. She wanted him to get married as soon as possible and have a grandson for her. It was too lonely to stay in such a big house alone. Ambassador Qin Dingkong never interfered with his son's marriage. For him, it was better to let nature take its course. There was no need to force it. Just like now, his wife was anxious to arrange a blind date for their son at home. Every time they talked on the phone, she would say that their son didn't want to cooperate with her arrangements. He even refused to attend the blind date party she arranged with the excuse that he was busy with work. It made her lose face. She always said such things, which gave him a headache as a husband. However, he knew that it was not easy for his wife to stay at home alone. He asked her to come over, but she was worried about their son, who was temporarily working in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Beijing. She insisted on finding a girlfriend for their son that she was satisfied with. Only then would she come over. Why bother? Was it their son looking for a girlfriend, or her looking for a girlfriend? Why did she have to be satisfied? Wasn't it enough as long as their son was satisfied? Ambassador Qin Dingkong, who had been annoyed by his wife's every phone call, planned to have a good talk with his son Qin Xiu in his limited free time. He wanted his son to comfort his wife after returning to China. If he found a girl he liked, he could tell his wife directly. Then everything would be solved. Qin Xiu, who took the file, sat down and didn't speak immediately. Instead, he carefully checked whether each file had been reviewed and whether there was the ambassador's signature. After he went through the files one by one and confirmed that there were no mistakes, Qin Xiu closed the file and said with a smile, "What do you want to talk to me about? Let's talk about everything, from work to personal life. We could talk about everything." Ambassador Qin Dingkong leisurely leaned against the back of the office chair and looked at his son, who was more outstanding than him. As a father, he was indeed very proud. He was less serious about work and had more fatherly kindness in his eyes. "Let's talk about work later. Let's talk about your personal life first. You are 27 years old this year, and you will soon be 30. Now that you have some success in your career, have you considered finding a girl, getting a marriage certificate, and have a family of your own?" They never talked about personal life. Now it was quiet for a while. Then, of course, Ambassador Qin Dingkong's interest was piqued. "It's not very obvious, but you're my son, and I'm your father. I can see some clues. If you like her, you have to go after her and tell her your feelings. Don't think that you are familiar with her. It's useless to talk about it when your relationship has improved. You should know that a good girl doesn't have to worry about not having pursuers, especially when she is in the army where men are abundant and women are scarce. Many male soldiers are staring at her. You are very likely to be late for a lifetime. After all, he was an elder. He had experienced ups and downs and accumulated experience. Young people like Qin Xiu could not compare with him. He hit the nail on the head and pointed out the sadness of many men who thought, the girl I have a crush on is getting married today, but unfortunately, the groom is not me. Chapter 3045. Qin Xiu rarely talked about personal matters with his parents. Seeing his father speak so straightforwardly, he was not used to it. He cleared his throat and said, "I have known her for a long time. I knew her when she was still studying at my uncle's school. She was only in her second year of high school at that time." This time, it was Ambassador Qin Dingkong's turn to adjust his sitting posture. Did that mean his son had taken a liking to the girl when she was still in her second year of high school? The girl he saw in the cafeteria was wearing a military uniform. That meant she was still studying at a military school. Her age was about the same as his guess, around 20 years old. She was around 16 or 17 years old in high school. She was so young, yet Qin Xiu had taken a liking to her. Ambassador Qin Dingkong picked up the thermal cup on the desk and took a sip of hot tea to hide the shock in his heart. "Don't think too much. I got lost when I went to my uncle's school. She sent me back to my uncle's office. She was so young, and she was still a high school student. Don't think of me as a beast, Qin Xiu explained when he saw his father's reaction. Beast Xia, who was eating breakfast, expressed his innocence. Later, we met on and off. I suddenly realized that I had a crush on her when I went to the snow mountain and encountered an avalanche. When we were at our most helpless and in need of help, she walked alone from the high snow on the snowy peak with light. Dad, at that time, I actually thought that I would be buried in the snow until my whole body stiffened. But she came with hope. He recalled the time when Yi Qian appeared in his sight with light. The figure stepping on the light was like an ancient sword breaking out of the ground and rushing straight into the nine heavens. With a snow-white light, it instantly split open the hopeless darkness in front of him, allowing him to see hope in the future. In this way, the girl that he had known for many years and had only met a few times suddenly crashed into his heart. She took root in his heart, and he fell in love with her irredeemably. Qin Xiu had never told his family about these things. As his father, Ambassador Qin Dingkong also heard for the first time that his son, whom he was proud of, encountered an avalanche for the first time. Even though it had been a long time and his son was still sitting in front of him, he could not help but feel his heart palpitate. It turned out that the female soldier who was praised by the generals of other countries was his son's savior. However, Ambassador Qin Dingkong frowned slightly. He thought of his wife in the capital. Did you mention it to your mother? It's such a big matter, you should mention it. Also, where's the girl from? She's from Anyang. I've heard about her family from my uncle. Her parents died early when she was young. Her mother was a martyr, and her father was an honest farmer. When it came to Yi Qian's family situation, Qin Xiu didn't think there was anything wrong with it. He liked Yi Qian, so it had nothing to do with whether her family was good or bad. He also knew why his father asked such a question. Hearing this, Ambassador Qin Dingkong sighed in his heart. Although this is the first time I've met her, I like her very much. She's capable and talented. Father has a very good impression of her. Furthermore, she saved your life and is our family savior. But Qin Xiu, just because she saved your life is not enough for your mother and grandmother to accept her. Qin Xiu, what do you mean by this? If you just want to fall in love, I'll give you a piece of advice. Don't make things difficult for a good girl. If you want to get married, then you have to face the problem of our family properly. You can't wrong such a good girl because of this. Chapter 3046. Ambassador Qin Dingkong was referring to Mrs. Qin and his wife when he mentioned family problems. Mrs. Qin was born into a prestigious family in the capital and valued matching families the most. Mrs. Qin was the same. She was even more prejudiced against family background than her mother-in-law. She did not even choose a pretty girl from a humble family as her daughter-in-law. Ambassador Qin Dingkong had an older brother and a younger brother. Both of their daughters-in-law came from prestigious families, so Mrs. Qin paid more attention to them. Mrs. Qin was easy to talk to. Among her grandchildren, she liked Qin Xiu the most. As long as Qin Xiu liked her, she would like her too. Moreover, he was old now and did not care about family matters. His 3 nephews who were already married did not interfere. They made all the decisions themselves. Therefore, the only problem at home was Mrs. Qin. Qin Xiu laughed involuntarily. Dad, you're thinking too far ahead. I don't even know if there's a possibility between us. I do like her very much. I even thought that it was fate that we met in the cafeteria today. Unfortunately, he stopped and sighed softly. His slender fingers rubbed his temples helplessly. Ambassador Qin Dingkong, who was listening intently, could not help but ask, "What's wrong?" Qin Xiu said helplessly, "Unfortunately, I was interrupted before I could confess. With her intelligence, I'm afraid she has already guessed some of my thoughts. Next, I have to think carefully about how to pursue her, especially when there was such a strong opponent." However, before that, he had to confirm whether Yi Qian and Xia Jinyuan were together. If they were together, his bottom line would not allow him to do anything unscrupulous. If they were still pursuing each other, then he would not give in. They would rely on their own abilities to see who could win the heart of the beauty in the end. It doesn't matter if she knows. You can seize the opportunity next time. I support your decision. It's not easy to meet someone you like, so you should go after her. Even if you don't succeed, you won't have any regrets. As for your mother, I will take care of it. What era are we living in? As long as the girl is happy, everything is negotiable. Ambassador Qin Dingkong supported his son. He had a good impression of the girl when he met her last night. Today, when he saw her graceful behavior, he cast aside his prejudice and was happy to see the two young people get married. Don't mention this to the family first. It's unknown whether we can be together or not. I have no idea whether she will like me or not. If it's really possible, I will confess to the family. Qin Xiu did not think that his family's problems. The main issue was whether he could get Yi Qian and make her his girlfriend. When he said that, Ambassador Qin Dingkong laughed out loud. You have to have some confidence. My son is not bad either. When your mother called me, she couldn't help but show off to me. She said that so many people wanted to introduce their daughters to you, and so many families wanted to introduce their nieces to you. They're all so popular. You have to have some confidence. Leave your mother to me. She's so picky. Your sister is so scared that she doesn't dare to come back to China. She carries a camera all year round to take pictures of the scenery. Some time ago, your mother told me that she wanted to introduce your sister to Commander-in-Chief Xia's son. If I remember correctly, Commander-in-Chief Xia's son is the same age as you. Your sister is 1 year older than him. Chapter 3047. Speaking of his eldest daughter, Ambassador Qin Dingkong also felt helpless. His wife's strength and his daughter's stubbornness caused his eldest daughter to not have a family until now. He didn't know why his wife would have such an idea to marry his eldest daughter into a family Xia. Your grandmother and old Madame Xia didn't get along when they were still in the boudoir. She's still the same even when she's old. The two families don't have any contact with each other. Your mother dares to have such an idea. Isn't she messing around? Go back and remind your mother. If she continues to be so picky, your sister won't be able to get married for the rest of her life. Speaking of Commander-in-Chief Xia's son, Qin Xiu couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. Looking at his father, who was worried about his sister Qin Ying, he smiled and said, Commander-in-Chief Xia's son is now in the embassy. You've already seen him last night. He's also the son-in-law candidate in the eyes of the noble ladies in the capital. It's normal for my mother to have such an idea. Ambassador Qin Dingkong didn't know that the son-in-law candidate his wife had chosen was now in the embassy. He was also a young soldier who would participate in the IKA assault. He only knew that the Chinese side had sent 8 special forces to participate in the competition, but he didn't know the names of the special forces. Commander-in-Chief Xia's son. He had seen him a few years ago. It was said that he had joined the army. He didn't know what happened later. He didn't expect to meet him here. Their identities are not disclosed to the public. Don't mention it when you go back. Don't leak a word to your mother. Just pretend that you don't know about it. Ambassador Qin Dingkong didn't have the urge to go and have a look. The Chinese side called and asked him to arrange to meet them in person and pointed out that he couldn't walk around at will. He knew that the identities of the special forces needed to be kept secret. He didn't arrange for them to stay in the hotel, but directly arranged for them to stay in the embassy. Now that his son suddenly knew the identities of the 2 special forces, he even considered whether to let Qin Xiu live outside. Then he thought that the special forces would leave in the afternoon, so there was no need for him to stay. The conversation between the father and son naturally ended. Ambassador Qin Dingkong began to arrange for the 8 Chinese soldiers to return home. They would return home by civil aviation. All the boarding procedures needed to be connected with the Estonian military to confirm that there was no problem before boarding and leaving. Going back was much more complicated than going there, and it had to be arranged by the ambassador. What Ambassador Qin Dingkong did not expect was that Qin Xiu would meet another Special Forces soldier soon after he left. In the Chinese embassy in Estonia, Qin Xiu did not expect to meet 3 Chinese soldiers on the same day. Li Jinyan looked at Qin Xiu, and Qin Xiu looked at Li Jinyan. There was obvious surprise in their eyes. Beside them, Lieutenant Colonel Xia stood calmly. Facing his rival in love, he maintained a good demeanor. Li Jinyan and Qin Xiu looked at each other and smiled, thinking that this was really a coincidence. You're the third person I've met that I know. My father must be regretting arranging for me to stay at the embassy. You should have let me stay outside. Qin Xiu laughed and shook his head. First, it was Yi Qian, then it was young Master Xia, and now it's you. It's too much of a coincidence to meet 3 acquaintances here. Wasn't it coincidence? Li Jinyan also thought that it was really a coincidence. It's really a coincidence. I didn't expect to meet you here. We have some important matters to discuss with Ambassador Qin. We'll talk again when we're free. Li Jinyan didn't stop to exchange greetings. The two of them were just nodding at each other. They weren't close enough to stop and chat. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.